hello.
Our story begins inside the Jedi Council chambers. Ahsoka stood there looking at the Council. She felt a surreal sense of betrayal, and she listened as the Council, in their own way, dismissed their mistakes and placed the blame of their actions on the will and mystery of the Force. Skywalker told Ahsoka that he was sorry for what had happened and he wanted her to come back into the Jedi Order. Not only was the Council asking for her to return, but he was too. His words sat silently in the air as he held out her Padawan braid in his hand. Ahsoka looked down at her master's hand and looked back up at her master. She thought about everything she wanted in her life, and what she would have to do to get what she wanted. Truthfully, she didn't know what she wanted, but she couldn't trust the Jedi Council, and she couldn't trust herself. How could she trust herself if everyone she knew seemingly betrayed her? It was a difficult bind to be in, and Ahsoka grabbed Anakin's hands with hers gently, and she pressed his fingers closed and pushed his hand back towards him with little strength. She looked at him in an apologetic way, but the sadness in her eyes was overshadowed by the fear of what came next in her own journey. She squeezed a couple words out of her mouth before leaving the chambers and exiting down to the elevator. Anakin quickly followed her after he realized what she just said. It took a minute for everything to actually process for him. Once it did process inside of his mind, he ran out for her. By the time he got to the lift, she was already down inside the temple. Anakin had to wait. On the other side of the chambers, Obi-Wan watched Anakin leave and he stepped forward. A hand landed on his shoulder and Obi-Wan looked back at Jedi Master Plo Koon. He was the Jedi who brought Ahsoka to the temple, but he didn't want to stop little Ahsoka. She was on her own journey, and Plo believed, especially with Anakin's training of Ahsoka, that she'd be fine on her own. Ahsoka was extraordinary and extremely talented. She would survive on her own, and whatever threats came her way, she would be able to face any of them. Obi-Wan, instead of trying to break through, would stop in his tracks and wait, and he hoped that Anakin would actually be able to say the words needed to keep Ahsoka with them. After all, it was Obi-Wan who said that as long as they stayed together, they would be fine. He didn't want it to fall apart. After all, it was he who suggested that Ahsoka be offered the rank of Knight to the Council. Well, it was a combined effort, but he was one of the first individuals to suggest offering incentives for Ahsoka to rejoin the Jedi Order again. He was very disappointed in what had happened, and he wished that perhaps there was more he could do. In the coming hours, the silence from the Council and the inability to find Anakin only confirmed Obi-Wan's worst fears about the entire situation. Ahsoka had left the Jedi Order, so what was he to do now? Obi-Wan looked around for Anakin, but he couldn't find him. Obi-Wan believed that Anakin likely went back to Padme's residence, which was fine. He didn't care. Whatever made Anakin happy, that's all that mattered to Obi-Wan. If Anakin was happy, he was happy, and because Ahsoka was no longer a Jedi, he knew that there would be tension between Skywalker and the Council, which is something Kenobi wanted to avoid. The night fell on Coruscant and the Jedi Master sat idly in his room. Council members typically had larger rooms and Obi-Wan's had a nice view of the city. He hadn't slept well for the last couple of weeks anyways. The war took a toll on everyone, especially the Jedi, despite how emotionless the Jedi were supposed to be. But Obi-Wan was still haunted by ghosts, the ones that could dance in the hollow balls and palaces of kings and queens. Kenobi was seated and he'd been meditating since he couldn't find Anakin. He feared for Anakin's emotions, and he knew how blinded by them Skywalker could be, and he only hoped that Padme was helping him through it. That was something, as a Jedi Master, he wasn't fully equipped to handle or help with. Kenobi stood up from his seat and stretched his legs. His boots were in the corner of the room and he stepped over to the window. The blinds had been closed to block out the sun, but there wasn't even a whisper of sunlight behind them. When Kenobi opened them, he saw how iridescent the city skyline became. Obi-Wan knew his troubles, and the loss of Ahsoka sank in his heart. He turned back and looked at a small device he had on his nightstand for years. More than just years. Nearly 2 decades. Obi-Wan looked at it, and he used to listen to it nightly. It was something he played to fall asleep to, and he hadn't touched it in weeks. Obi-Wan thought about Ahsoka, and he wondered where she could be, and if she could sleep peacefully that night. Was there somewhere on Coruscant for her to be? Obi-Wan's lock onto the small device kept him fixated away from the lights that bounced around in the distance behind him. It was a true tragedy. Weeks felt like years, and yet he couldn't escape what scarred him the most. If he went to the little device, he'd ignite a flame that couldn't be kept lit. His worst fear was losing the message. As a man, he left it where it was, because it started to develop a fuzz of sorts. Obi-Wan walked across his room and sat on his bed next to the stand. He reached for the device, and then he stopped. He caught himself holding on to his attachments, but he couldn't lose 2 people in such a short period of time. First Satine, now Ahsoka. Obi-Wan said the names in his head. It was the first time since he was on Mandalore that he was able to say that name. Obi-Wan turned back to the small device and picked it up and brushed it off a little bit. There was dust on it. He pressed the play button and a small hologram popped up. He heard the fuzz set into the recording as he listened to it for the first time in years. The message that gave him butterflies turned nights alone into nights with someone so near and dear. Satine stood at the recording for an extra second. She didn't want to miss a single second of the recording. The moment she realized it was working, she spoke into it.
My dearest Ben,
I only wish for you the best. I thank you for your services, and I wish you and your master a safe journey back to Coruscant. I know I'll never forget our time, and I hope you don't either. The night you and I met will always be treasured for me. Goodbye, Obi-Wan.
The pain consumed him and he stood up like a man possessed. He had to find Ahsoka and bring her back. Maybe he could convince her to rejoin the Jedi Order. The chances were slim, but he still had to do it. Obi-Wan knew that losing Ahsoka, for Anakin, could be equal to Obi-Wan's loss of Satine. That hurt was something he didn't want his student to share. Kenobi grabbed his robes and prepared himself. Before running to the hangar bay and finding his ship and entering it, he went down to the uppermost layer of the Undercity. It wasn't technically the Undercity, it was a surface level below the skyscrapers. Ahsoka was quick and she was stealthy, but chances are, in her first day she wouldn't go any lower than the top layer. Obi-Wan found a place to land the Jedi ship and walked out. By the time he got down there, it was midnight. The drunks and gamblers were out on their last limbs. Of course, there were the younger people running around and having the time of their life, but that wasn't who he was looking for. Where was Ahsoka? He knew he couldn't call out her name, so instead of doing that, he had something to help him. Kenobi took Ahsoka's lightsabers, which was probably a big no-no, but he did it for the purpose of finding her, essentially hoping that the kyber crystals inside the blades would connect to Ahsoka and lead him to her. He walked around the layer for 40 minutes and felt like he wasn't getting anywhere. Clearly his hopes weren't working out. Luckily for him, the inverse of what he was hoping for happened. The kyber crystals called out to Ahsoka and brought her to them. It was better than bringing Obi-Wan to her. Ahsoka snuck around watching Obi-Wan. Something seemed so off about him, but she approached him and asked what he was doing here. Obi-Wan turned around when he heard her voice. He jumped with a certain amount of joy and turned to smile at her. It hadn't been more than 12 hours, and yet she already carried a different presence. She just looked at him and asked what it was that he wanted from her. He said he just wanted to talk to her. He was trying to help. Ahsoka very quickly rejected this. She was upset that he even tried to suggest he was here to help. Where was that help when she was almost killed for doing something she didn't do? Obi-Wan nodded his head. He couldn't deny his failure, and he couldn't deny that he likely broke a bond of trust that would sit between the two of them. He reached out his hands with the lightsabers and told her that at the very least he wanted her to be safe, even if she wouldn't listen to him. She took the lightsabers and placed them on her belt, and she asked why he was really here. Obi-Wan paused for a moment. He was here for Anakin, truthfully, which would be in its own right selfish. Obi-Wan was here to get Ahsoka back into the Order for someone else rather than herself. He knew that wouldn't necessarily fly with her, so he suggested that he was here to help her. He wanted to make sure she was okay, because the thought of her being hurt or being alone just kept him up at night. This was in all actuality true. Obi-Wan didn't want to think about a 16-year-old Ahsoka out in a large city all by herself. 3 trillion sentients lived on Coruscant, and she was here alone. 1 of 3 trillion. What a horrifying statistic for her. She said thank you for the concern, but she was fine on her own. She turned around and prepared to go. Obi-Wan called out to her.
Ahsoka, wait!
What? Is there something else for you to say? Did the Council send you, or did Anakin?
No, I came on my own. I wanted to make sure you were safe.
You did such a great job of that. You know I could have been executed by this point. My life could be gone.
I know. That was the mistake of the Collective Council. I'm not denying that.
Then what do you want?
I want you to come back, Ahsoka.
Naturally, Ahsoka was shocked when she heard this, but more than shocked, she was disgusted. Why would she ever go back? There had to be something else, but she crossed her arms in a disgusted manner. Ahsoka spoke up before Obi-Wan could say a word. She told him everything she told Anakin, why would she want to be a Jedi anymore, and why she couldn't trust herself anymore. She didn't want to stay within an order that couldn't trust her, an order that made her feel empty. Obi-Wan tried to reason with her, but it was far too late to reason. She told Obi-Wan her truest feelings.
Obi-Wan, I don't know how to feel. I don't know what to tell you. Before the trial, I could float. I may have disagreed with the war, but I felt a part of something. Now I just fall down. Now I'm just a shadow, and that's all I'll ever be. I'm not sure now what I was made for. Don't you see that?
He could see that. He could see how much it hurt her, and he searched for the answers. Obi-Wan came here to bring her home, but now it seemed like he wasn't even sure if he wanted to go home. So he stopped and he looked at her. She was holding back tears. It hurt her to talk like this. Obi-Wan was her Grand Master. He was Anakin's master, and she was attached to his lineage. She didn't want to ditch Kenobi or Skywalker. They were two incredibly important people in her life, yet here she was, outside the Order, alone. Obi-Wan thought about everything. He thought about the message he just listened to. He thought about how much the Jedi meant to him. But maybe this was a moment for him to right the wrongs of his past. The past that couldn't be undone. But if he made this choice when he originally wanted to, perhaps the person he wanted to save most would still be alive. This would hurt Anakin, and Anakin would likely blame the Council. Or maybe he would be able to bridge a gap between the two of them. Obi-Wan could be a representative of the Council to help Ahsoka. His fight was between two worlds, his mandate to the Jedi and his love for a student. Obi-Wan thought of the message and remembered Satine telling him to be safe on his journey. He took the short moment out of context and listened to it in his mind again and again. Obi-Wan smiled softly and told Ahsoka that he would join her. She looked at him with confusion, but he told her that he would join her. He didn't want her to be alone, and he refused to leave her alone. This wasn't because she wasn't capable. She was very capable. Truthfully, she was probably more capable than Obi-Wan was, but he wanted to join her for her. There was so much about Ahsoka that he believed he could help with her. He knew that she could do it alone, but he wanted to be by her side. She looked at him like he lost his mind, and perhaps he did, but her little speech moved him to this decision. She didn't know how to feel, and he just wanted to support her until she did know what she wanted. It was her life and it was her direction, but he could be the guide she needed, especially since he wasn't when she needed him the most. Would Obi-Wan ever return to the Order? Not even he knew. But he did know that the future before Ahsoka and him was rigid and it would be full of twists and turns. Ahsoka told Obi-Wan that leaving the Order wasn't his life mission, and that he shouldn't throw away what was so positive for him. Obi-Wan shook his head. He told her that it wasn't the first time he was presented with such an option. Though the last time he was presented the option, he didn't take it, and it cost the life of someone he cared about deeply. Ahsoka was very confused by this. This made no sense out of context. When else was Obi-Wan going to leave the Order? She asked him while trying to push her emotions back down. The fact that he wasn't abandoning her and he was helping her through this made her heart happy. She didn't know how much she wanted this, and as it turns out, she desperately craved his support. His actions told her how much she wanted it, and it warmed her heart to know that he was here with her on this journey. Her frustration with the Order is why she pushed Anakin away on the steps of the temple, and with a bit of clear conscience, she was able to be accepting of Obi-Wan's choice. She asked about that situation, the one where he could have left the Order but didn't. Obi-Wan nodded his head and told her to come along with him. They walked back to the small Jedi shuttle he arrived in, and he told her to take command of the vessel and go wherever she wanted to go in the galaxy. The choice was hers, and on the way there, he would tell her about his past choices and how they may have simply just been wrong. While Obi-Wan was old enough to not blame himself for something so far out of his control, he told Ahsoka the truth about everything. The truth about his mission with Satine, the truth about his affection for her, the truth about, despite the reality of the situation, how he hadn't slept in weeks since her death, because he to an extent blamed himself for it. He never went far enough to put himself down or hurt himself because Satine wouldn't have wanted that. However, it didn't stop him from suggesting that his actions could have been different in different places of his life. Aiming for Maul's neck instead of killing him, killing Maul on Florum, or killing him elsewhere. Of course, that was violent, but the other alternative was leaving the Order behind and marrying into the royal family. He could have killed Pre Vizsla and the other Mandalorians would have never found Maul, or something else. Who knows? It was just possibilities based on what he had knowledge of. Things could have gone so much differently otherwise. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan dropped out of hyperspace over the planet of Corvus. Kenobi asked Ahsoka why they were here, and she looked over with confusion. She suggested that the Force was bringing her here. It wasn't the Force bringing her here. She knew of it because of the stories she was told inside the temple by Professor Hiang, and the multitude of other teachers that talked about it. Corvus was the home of one of many Seeing Stones across the galaxy. The Seeing Stone could alert other Force-sensitive beings to where one was. This was created during an era of which the Jedi were separated, and it was used to bring them together. Ahsoka wasn't here for the Seeing Stone. She was here for the connection to the Force. There was so much war and destruction, and she wanted, for the first time in her life, to feel a sense of relief. The Jedi ship landed on the surface in a small field, and the two of them got up and walked at the door. Obi-Wan felt his belt buzzing, and Ahsoka turned back and looked at him. She crossed her arms and asked who it was, and he told her that it was likely Anakin. Obi-Wan asked her if she would like him to answer the call or not. She shrugged her shoulders before turning back and walking away. Obi-Wan took the holo device off his belt and turned it on. He watched Ahsoka walk up the hill slowly. She was closing her eyes and holding her hand out to the side of her, feeling through the Force. It illuminated the planet in a fulfilling radiance. She turned back and saw the hologram in Obi-Wan's hand. Anakin was asking his former master where he had gone and what was happening. Obi-Wan told Anakin that he was currently on Corvus with Ahsoka. He assured Anakin that he was making sure Ahsoka would be safe and that she'd be alright. Anakin told Obi-Wan that the Council was asking for him, and Obi-Wan simply told Anakin that he was no longer a Jedi. That was a shock to hear, though he informed Anakin that this was not a means to undermine him in his own journey. Obi-Wan expressed that he believed what he was doing was what was best for him. He continued and told Anakin that despite his choice and his path, he didn't want Anakin to feel pressure to join them or leave the Order himself. Obi-Wan told Anakin that he was the bravest Jedi he'd ever met, and he was incredibly proud of him. Anakin was already emotional, The night with Padme before was helping, but learning of this clearly wasn't. There was a moment of silence between the two of them. Anakin moved between his emotions, flipping in and out of anger, frustration, sadness, and desperation. But his master reassured him that the future for him, despite his choices, would be bright. Anakin was thankful but extremely confused as his master ended the call and walked down the ramp of the ship. He watched Ahsoka as he continued walking through the tall grass. She stopped and climbed onto a small flat rock and sat down. Obi-Wan asked what she was doing. Ahsoka looked at Obi-Wan with a wince of pain sitting in her eyes. She suggested that she was searching for peace, looking for something that she didn't yet have. Obi-Wan told her that he would be around. He didn't want to distract her on her own journey. He continued walking up the side of the hill, pondering over his own journey and his own destination in life. He stopped at the top of the hill and looked down and across it. Did he truly make the right decision for himself? Ahsoka, on the other hand, could feel the wind blowing through the air. A gentle breeze of reassurance left her with more questions than it ever did answers. The distraction within her thoughts led her back to the past, something she clearly couldn't move on from in this moment. Her focus on the past led to her questioning where she could be if she hadn't been approached by Obi-Wan. On Coruscant, she had no motive of transportation. She didn't have Jedi-issued Republic credits with her because she technically was no longer a Jedi, so she would have been scavenging, not just for transportation, but for the necessities as well. She would have been a street rat, and the thought of that ripped her away from her concentration. She opened her eyes and a number of clouds rolled in. She turned to see if she could find Obi-Wan, and when she turned around, she saw nothing. The world she was in vanished, and she looked around. Ahsoka stood up in a dark realm. She didn't know what had happened and spoke aloud. She called for Obi-Wan's name, but not a response came. Instead, she heard a voice she never heard before. Ahsoka turned back and saw a man she never met. He wore Jedi robes, but his face was older. She called out and asked who this was. The man told her that he was Obi-Wan's master, Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Their legacy through the Force was strong, whether it be from Yoda, Dooku, himself, Obi-Wan, Anakin, or her. She was a part of a legacy of great Jedi. He asked her why she came here. Why was she looking into the Force for help? Ahsoka told him that she didn't know who she was. She didn't know how to find it. Qui-Gon simply told her that instead of searching the galaxy for it, she needed to look within. Go to different places, explore, but don't think the answer will come when she looked outside of herself. She was confused, but he walked towards her with a grin. He told her that it'd be her first step into her true life. She would find what she was searching for in due time. She just needed to trust herself. Ahsoka watched as he patted her shoulder and walked in a different direction. She called out and asked how she could learn to trust herself. Qui-Gon turned to her and told her that she would have to learn how to do it on her own. He smiled and waved her on, telling her to come along. They had a long journey ahead of them. Ahsoka slipped out of the vision and fell to the ground. Obi-Wan was in the area and he happened to see it. He ran over to her direction and asked if she was okay. When her eyes opened, she looked at Obi-Wan and she said she saw Master Qui-Gon. He was confused and looked around. She noted that it was like Mortis in a way. Obi-Wan thought about how peculiar this was. He asked her what Qui-Gon said to her, and she said that he was very adamant that she learned to trust herself by herself, but he didn't give clear instructions on how to do it. Obi-Wan laughed and helped her up. He told her that Qui-Gon never made these things easy to understand. Perhaps there was another place that would be better for her to find herself, and she denied, suggesting that Qui-Gon didn't believe she should go out into the galaxy and do it out there. Or in other words, she was supposed to look inside of herself instead of find it elsewhere. But Obi-Wan expressed that Qui-Gon had a philosophy about that, but to pursue it required total peace within the Force. Obi-Wan said that there was a planet that Master Qui-Gon had a lot of interest in discovering, and he'd only been there once. Ahsoka was confused, but he elaborated. Qui-Gon wasn't always infatuated with the Jedi Order, and he often went out of his way to show it and say it. But the main point being is Qui-Gon believed his efforts were not in vain. Qui-Gon always said he chose the Jedi because of the light. They were the representation of the light, and he didn't want to go anywhere other than the light. Ahsoka asked what planet it was, and Obi-Wan thought for a moment, not remembering. He took her to the ship and opened up a hollow map. He scoured over the map for minutes until he found it. Kenobi pointed to the map and told her that it was a planet of Dagobah. Qui-Gon had been there once. It was between being Dooku's student and being Obi-Wan's master. He did it for the sole purpose of doing what it was that Ahsoka was searching for, finding himself. Obi-Wan opened up a little bit and said that Qui-Gon said that one day he would go there and find himself. Ahsoka asked what changed that. Obi-Wan sat down in the cockpit and told her that he was a Jedi Master before he was a Jedi Knight. He never got to enjoy being a Knight because he was immediately sworn in as Anakin's master. Ahsoka asked him if he regretted it, and Obi-Wan shook his head. He told her that it was difficult, but if he had to do it, he'd do it again. Ahsoka found this interesting and realized that perhaps Obi-Wan being here was a means for him to reconnect with his younger self. Maybe it was that, or maybe it was just as simple as he explained the first time. She sat down in the seat next to Obi-Wan, and the ship lifted off and flew away from Corvus. When the ship was in hyperspace, the two of them started talking again. The tension between the two of them began to vanish. Ahsoka didn't necessarily always agree with Obi-Wan's decisions or his loyalty to the Council. She found it really hard to believe that he would just leave the Order, but it was the perfect storm. Obi-Wan had no reason to believe Anakin was in any danger, but Ahsoka, on the other hand, he didn't want to lose her too. It was him latching onto attachments, which wasn't very Jedi-like of him to do, but the death of Satine really helped etch that forward. Though they talked about the war and their mutual disagreement with it being waged on, and how they felt about it coming to an end and where. The most important talk with each other was their conversation about finding oneself. Obi-Wan was searching for someone he lost when Qui-Gon died, and Ahsoka was searching for someone she never knew, and Ahsoka who wasn't a soldier, but a person. To her, it was two different things, and she refused to fall down a path she didn't want for herself. As they eventually arrived at Dagobah, the two of them began their search swiftly for why Qui-Gon brought them here. There had to be a legitimate reason for him doing so, but neither of them could find the answer. They didn't know that a little ways away from their landing zone was a cave, one shrouded in darkness, but a cave with a strong connection to the Force. The first day on Dagobah proved to give them no results. Perhaps another day would find them what they were looking for. As they set up a small camp outside their ship, Ahsoka asked Obi-Wan a series of questions, the first one being if he was afraid. He asked her what she was referring to, and she asked if he was just afraid being out here without the Order. He nodded his head, though he explained it. He didn't see it as fear, he saw it as a natural reaction to being uncomfortable, or in the uncomfortable. She asked why he was so at peace with it, and Obi-Wan smiled as he slowly moved down onto a cot he laid out. He told her that to be uncomfortable was to grow. If he wasn't uncomfortable, then he wouldn't be moving forward. He also trusted the Force and suggested that, as he laid down, she get some rest as well. If they could find what they were looking for out here, then tomorrow would be an arduous day for them. Ahsoka had her own cot, but when she laid on it, she couldn't really get any sleep. She just kind of existed, and she looked up into the sky. It was such a dark world, and the ambience of the forest around her left her in a discomfort. Her eyes were closed, but she kept feeling a pull, the same one that took her away from the Order. The same thoughts she faced before she traveled into her mind as she questioned herself more and more until she faded into sleep. In the morning, she woke up. Obi-Wan was already awake, and the two of them got their supplies and got on the move. Their walk through the forest lasted around an hour, until Ahsoka stopped. She had explained to him earlier in the day that she was feeling pulled to a certain direction. Obi-Wan did believe her, and he followed her, trusting that she would take them to the right place. It was only a couple steps until she stopped. Obi-Wan looked at the cave and told her to hand him her weapons and her backpack. She looked at him with concern. He told her that she would likely face her fears down there. She needed to be mentally prepared to face them. Her lightsabers would do her no good. Ahsoka thought for a moment and then pressed forward. She walked down to the caves without her weapons and her backpack. She felt the Force surround her. It felt like her lungs were being compressed, and she felt an insurmountable fear. She stopped. A number of reptiles crawled around her, and branches fell across her shoulders. The further she walked in, the further from the brush she got until she exited and looked at the Jedi Temple. It didn't look like the temple. It was left in ruins. Ahsoka looked in front of her and saw the younglings she's accompanied to Ilum running out. She tried calling out their names, but they dropped to the ground one at a time. Blaster fire came from the smoke, but she couldn't see who fired. Ahsoka reached for her blades, but they weren't there. To her horror, she looked at Captain Rex and he came out, confirming that the temple had been secured. She felt overwhelmed and almost fell backwards, but then she heard a voice crawl over her back. A sinister elder man told the captain that he did well, and then he said Ahsoka's name, telling her that she caused all of this, and she was responsible for the death of the Jedi. One choice she made changed everything forever. She stumbled back and looked at a hooded figure, and then she let out a terrible screech before falling in the darkness. She turned around, feeling water around her ankles. Anakin was standing in front of her, and she asked him what happened. He turned around, and as he did, his face was consumed by two halves, a robotic half that wasn't human and an actual face. She almost gasped, but stood her ground. He said that she didn't seem surprised, and she shook her head, saying that none of this was real. His lightsaber ignited in a crimson glow and slashed across her. Ahsoka's eyes shut, and she was sat before a great temple. When she opened her eyes, she was confused. A little girl came up to her and called her Master Tano. She smiled and tugged at Ahsoka's hand. She asked what this was about, and the little girl tugged harder. Ahsoka looked at the grandeur of this temple. It was beautiful, and it was snugly fit into a valley. As she turned back to hear the sound of waves, she could see that the temple was built in the most peaceful abode in the galaxy. The water looked too perfect, and she could see right through it. Her hand was pulled again, and she snickered. Ahsoka walked through the gates of the temple, and the little girl said that they were waiting for her. Ahsoka turned to the little girl and asked who. She smiled with excitement and said that her students were waiting for her. What students? Ahsoka walked forward and saw massive statues. None of them looked remotely familiar. She then heard voices of the Jedi before her speaking to her. She didn't know any of these voices. She may have known their names, but they were heard to her. Names like Avar Kriss, Elsa Man, Loden Greatstorm, Stalin Geos, Satil Shan, Revan, and many more. They were unrecognizable voices, and they called out to her, telling her the path forward would be the triumph of the Jedi Order. She was startled and then terrified of the pressure put before her. She looked at the little girl who asked her what was wrong, and Ahsoka looked with a blank expression. The girl gestured to Ahsoka to get closer, so she knelt down, and the little girl told Ahsoka she was the future and the past. In the present, she was a guide. Ahsoka turned her head, and when she did, she was looking at a blurred light. It was hidden in between the rocks and natural elements around her. A snake slithered across her skin, and she looked down at it. Not an ounce of fear sat within her heart. Instead, a sense of peace. The snake slithered to the ground and under her and into the darkness. Ahsoka turned and looked for the exit and made her way to it. Obi-Wan saw her face when she exited, and he asked what had happened. She simply sat down on a log next to him and shook her head, saying she needed time to figure it out. Obi-Wan placed his lightsaber next to her and told her that he would go into the cave next. When he exited, perhaps she would be ready to talk about it. If not, then it was no rush. Obi-Wan followed the same steps she did, though when he walked down into the caves, his first vision was very similar to Ahsoka's. Instead of younglings, it was the peers in the council. Each and every single one of them dropped to his feet. They asked what he had done to them. It was Mace Windu, Plo Koon, Shaak Ti, Kit Fisto, Yoda, and the rest of them. They all died, and they asked him, each and every single one of them, at their own time, why he did it. What did he bring upon them? A pressure ate into his back and his shoulders when he heard those words. He tried to make sense of it, but he couldn't. The flip moved him into the desolate lands of Mandalore, and all he saw was a hooded figure. It didn't say much, but when it spoke, the voice was all too familiar. The voice repeated a part of the phrase inside the hologram from before. She said, "My dearest Ben, I only wish for you the best." Obi-Wan knew it was her, and she pointed towards the distance, one that dragged far away towards Sundari. The tragedy is, Obi-Wan would never realize that the Force was using the little tiny bit of midichlorian Satine had to manifest her inside the vision. She did just exist somewhere out in the netherworlds of the Force, but in the same way everyone else did. Just a shadow, nothing more. Obi-Wan stepped towards the direction he was pointed in and felt water rising up to his hips. He was standing next to Anakin. There was a glow to Anakin's smile, and Obi-Wan turned over to see Ahsoka. She had on white robes that floated gently on top of the water. Obi-Wan looked down at his hands and he saw an infant. Anakin asked Obi-Wan if he was ready, and Obi-Wan looked up. He'd been here before. He knew what he was about to do, but he didn't. It felt so surreal. Obi-Wan closed his eyes to blink, and when he did, he opened his eyes in the cave, surrounded by darkness and left alone. He dropped to his knees and felt the soil under his fingertips. It was remarkable. The great mystery of the Force. Was he being called to Mandalore? Is that what this was? Obi-Wan got up and ran out of the cave. He looked for Ahsoka. She was still sitting there. Her mind was silent, and she was still as the life around her. Ahsoka opened her eyes when she felt Obi-Wan's presence. She asked what he saw. Obi-Wan said that he saw a number of things and suggested they start their hike back to their camp and talk about it along the way. The two of them shared their visions, both of them seeing a downfall, a personalized vision, and a rebirth of sorts. Though the only thing that stood out to both of them was Mandalore. Both Obi-Wan and Ahsoka believed that they would find their answers on Mandalore, though Kenobi knew that the planet was occupied territory. Maul and his Mandalorians controlled most of all of it, and those they didn't were just rebels hiding out until their extinction. The two former Jedi went to Mandalore and they arrived in secrecy. They didn't go anywhere near Sundari. Instead, they landed on the far side of the Seas of Nothingness and took some speeders down towards the city. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka shared a strong bond with each other, and without the code or the Jedi around them, they were able to allow their bond to flourish. It was a very similar bond to the one Anakin and Ahsoka shared, but to Ahsoka, Obi-Wan was much obviously just a master, not as much an older brother. Regardless, they sped across the plains for hours until arriving at the capital of Sundari. It seemed like a fortress, but Obi-Wan knew a way to get into the city, through the catacombs on the exterior. Satine showed them to him back in the day, and all he had to do was take advantage of it. And that's exactly what they did. They climbed down through the catacombs and followed a path that led directly to the palace. Ahsoka believed that what they both encountered on Dagobah was a sign of the changes to come, yet the potential terror that awaited those stuck in the past. With Mandalore being the only clearly known location that wasn't the Jedi Temple obviously, they couldn't help but come here. Ahsoka believed that maybe their journey would be extended through a stop on Mandalore. They climbed through the underbelly of the palace until they entered one of the pristine hallways. Ahsoka had been here before, but she hadn't talked to Obi-Wan about much regarding Satine since the first time it was mentioned. After this mission, she figured she might as well ask again. The two of them walked the hallways until Maul's voice could be heard. He sounded like he was beginning to get deranged. Maul had a hell of a time. He was captured by Sidious, and then he only recently escaped. His escape made him a little bit more delusional than he was before he left. He was talking to some people, and he stopped, ending the call because he could feel Obi-Wan's presence. He could also feel someone else's, which brought him a sense of interest. Maul yelled out at the top of his lungs, calling Kenobi's name, and they rounded the corner. Maul was sitting on her throne, and he was looking in Kenobi's direction, asking if he came here to die, where his lover took her last breaths. Ahsoka's eyes darted from Maul to Kenobi, who took a deep breath. A lightsaber ignited, and Ahsoka followed in Obi-Wan's steps by doing the same thing with her own blades. Maul hissed, stepping forward from the throne and igniting his lightsaber. He launched himself forward, and Kenobi quickly moved in front of Ahsoka, taking the brunt of the attack. In a way, this mirrored their fight on Naboo. Master and apprentice, but not his apprentice. You get the point. Their blades moved steadily. While Maul was quick, he wasn't going to expose himself. He had to protect himself with two duelists here. Ahsoka was nothing to scoff at for a 16-year-old. She went toe-to-toe with General Grievous twice, and she could definitely hold her own. Also, not for nothing, Obi-Wan could very easily piss off Darth Maul, which was working in their favor. Because of Maul's earlier scream, a bundle of Mandalorians entered the room preparing to defend their ruler. Obi-Wan told Ahsoka to break off, and she did, very quickly dismantling the Mandalorians that came her way. It wasn't easy work, but she was doing everything in her power to make sure she dealt with them appropriately. She was able to turn a few of them into bombs by killing them with their jetpacks on. They flew into walls exploding. It was kind of funny, but it got more attention. By the time Maul's lead Mandalorian entered, Maul was kicked to the ground. Gar Saxon saw the weakness of Maul for the first time, but it was clear Obi-Wan and Ahsoka had to go. Obi-Wan could definitely kill Maul, but in the position he was in, it would also sacrifice Ahsoka, and he wouldn't do that. Kenobi called out to her and told her it was time to go. She agreed, turning away and running for the window. The two of them used the Force and blasted the window apart. The Mandalorians opened fire, and Maul looked up from the ground, yelling at them. The two Jedi threw their lightsabers behind their backs as they leapt through the window. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka landed, and she asked where they would go. He smiled, slamming his blade into the ground itself and cutting a hole around himself, and falling in. Ahsoka threw her blades down to the ground with the Force, and spun them around as she dropped down in a hole next to him. They began running in the opposite way, expecting a pursuit. Turns out Gar Saxon was quite offended that Maul lost to a Jedi, and challenged Maul to the Darksaber. The two Jedi, on the other hand, got to their speeders and sped back to their shuttle on the far side of the plains. They were surprised they weren't being trailed, but as they left, a bunch of Mandalorian starfighters descended on the planet and made their way for the capital. Turns out their actions got the attention of Bo-Katan, and they led a counter-assault. The intention was to take back the capital city. The two former Jedi accidentally reignited the flame of Mandalorian civil war. A certain and genuine guilt sat on their shoulders upon their return to the shuttle. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka put their speeders away and walked into the bay of the ship. Obi-Wan apologized. He said they never should have come to Mandalore. It was personal and it was wrong. Ahsoka didn't accept the apology. While there was legitimate room for him to be apologetic, she agreed with him. They both went to Mandalore. It's not like it was a master-apprentice relationship. She could have said she didn't want to go if she didn't want to, and not for nothing, she wanted to be here. She hoped that they could have changed things for the better, but they didn't. Ahsoka said that perhaps they would find another place to go. Obi-Wan asked her where she would like to go, and she said she wanted to get far away from the war. She was tired of being a soldier, and she didn't want to be a part of any more conflicts. She hoped they could stop Maul and change things, but that clearly wasn't the case. Out from the corridors of the ship, they heard a voice.
Ahsoka, don't bear the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders.
Our story continues on Mandalore inside of a Jedi shuttle. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka whipped their heads back and looked directly at Anakin. He stood there with a bit of a cocky smile. How did he find them? Well, he was Anakin Skywalker after all, and not for nothing, it seemed like the place to go perhaps. Anakin could actually track Obi-Wan's communicator. He just didn't disclose his location to anyone else. This truthfully confused Obi-Wan, and when he asked about it, Anakin told him he put a tracker in it after he faked his death. He didn't want to accidentally almost kill Obi-Wan again. He just kinda nodded his head. That was awkward. Anyways, they got around to asking Anakin what he was doing here. Anakin walked over into the bay and sat down, telling them that he was abandoning the Jedi Order. He had no interest in being a Jedi without his two favorite people not being Jedi. The odd thing is for Anakin is that he seemed really relaxed about it. But between the loss of Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, he decided that he might as well be open with his relationship with Padme and join his friends. He didn't have to be a warrior. Despite his words to Ahsoka on the steps of the Jedi Temple, he felt no desire to uphold them. Why would he? It's not like he would stay for the Jedi Council or anyone else. He was known by everyone in the Order, but he didn't know everyone. Anakin asked them what they were up to, and they told him about their trip to Corvus, Dagobah, and finally Mandalore. Ahsoka said that she was searching for her belonging, and Obi-Wan was just doing the same, to his own extent. Anakin just nodded his head and asked them if they found out anything about themselves yet. Ahsoka looked at Obi-Wan and then back to Anakin and told him about their visions. She mentioned the vision of the robotic Anakin, and he was taken aback quite a bit. He was unsure how to feel about it, but he suggested that maybe Yoda was right, about the Force being in motion or something, whatever he said. Anakin didn't like the idea of being seen as a villain, so he just kind of deflected so he wouldn't be seen as one. He told them that he would like to accompany them from here on out, but he said it seemed like they didn't really have a clear direction to go in yet. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka looked to each other, and in reality, they didn't. Anakin stood up and whistled. R2 rolled into the room, and Anakin told R2 to look in the Jedi database for planets that could be useful. Anakin turned to the two of them and admitted that he wanted nothing to do with Mortis, so as long as they stayed away from that, he was fine. The trio didn't remember a whole lot about Mortis. Anakin remembered just enough about it to remember Qui-Gon, but the whole vibe of the planet just seemed off. From what they remembered, it wasn't the best time of their lives, and to avoid that would be beneficial for them. Anakin perked up. He thought of something funny, and so he spoke out, without even thinking.
Why don't we take a history trip, go to some old temples or something?
That's actually not a terrible idea.
Wait, what?
Well, considering both Obi-Wan and I had visions about a temple, perhaps it would be worth a start.
Wait, I wasn't being serious. So, wait, you're leaving the Order to go back to the Order?
I'm not going to the Order. I'm just expanding my knowledge.
Oh, so that's what you're calling it now.
Obi-Wan looked at the two of them and thought of the first place they could go to. He leaned down to R2 while the former master and apprentice continued their little playful bickering. He handed the droid a chip that had all the locations of temples across the galaxy. They'd be able to take their pick. Obi-Wan had access to them because he was a council member, and he just happened to have a couple more devices on hand than any other Jedi. Every council member had been prepared for the worst. If any one of them was the last surviving member of the council, then they would instantaneously be sworn in as a Grand Master until they could fix the situation. So he knew where every temple was, and as Anakin and Ahsoka continued, a hologram was pulled up across the bay and they turned their attention to it. There were highlighted planets in the hologram that showed which ones had Jedi temples or outposts on them. It was a hologram that was updated by Professor Yang, until the outposts and temples became unstable or forgotten to time. Anakin crossed his arms and called Snips and asked her to take her pick. She looked at the two of them and their eyes drifted to her, curious to see where she would like to go. Next to each of the planets were dates on them, and Ahsoka asked what Ahch-To was. Obi-Wan turned his head and looked at the planet on the far side of the galaxy. He thought for a moment and turned back. Anakin shook his head. He wouldn't know, he never paid attention during those classes. Obi-Wan thought for a moment. There was something special about Ahch-To, but he was unsure. It had been a while since he learned about it. The planet wasn't talked about much because they didn't really have much of a reason to talk about it, though he believed that there was some ancient text on the planet in case the Order fell. It was essentially a security blanket for the Order. The religion was completely maintained inside of a couple books that were safeguarded from the galaxy. There were a lot of temples, specifically, that were known in the public domain, simply due to the Jedi and the Republic having relationship over the years. But planets like Ahch-To were unknown by anyone other than Jedi. Ahsoka thought that was interesting, and Anakin almost pleaded with her that they don't do it, but she was insistent on taking the journey to Ahch-To. Anakin told R2 to fire up the engines on the starfighter. He'd be staying inside the shuttle with the other two. Obi-Wan suggested that R2 come with them, but Anakin said that there was a reason he wanted his ship with them. While he had no intention of flying it through hyperspace, he wanted to have it in case he was going to leave. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka questioned him a little further, and Anakin kind of shriveled away from the topic he brought up. But through a couple winces here and there, he was referring to his marriage with the senator. Both Obi-Wan and Ahsoka looked at each other for a moment before bursting out in laughter. Anakin was so confused before Ahsoka turned around and rolled her eyes at him. She said of course they knew, as if it wasn't obvious enough. Anakin pouted back at her. It wasn't obvious, but how could it be obvious? Obi-Wan looked at Anakin and told him he was a terrible liar, and it turns out, when it doesn't come to politics, so is Padme. Anakin asked again, but Obi-Wan got up and told them they had a long journey ahead of them. Once the coordinates were set, R2 took Anakin's starfighter and the Jedi prepared for the shuttle to lift off, as it departed from Mandalore. Once they were in hyperspace, the trio felt a sense of completion. They'd always been with each other and they were always by each other's side, so it was nice to have that again. They were able to talk about everything. Of course, the first thing was teasing Anakin of his marriage. Since he wasn't used to openly talking about it, he got flustered really quickly, and for Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, it was hilarious to watch Anakin's face turn more and more red than a melee rune. There were obviously some serious talks, but they got to enjoy each other's company. More than ever, actually. It was a defining characteristic of this. For the first time in their relationship as a trio, they weren't focused on the war. The stress and pressure from all of them respectively vanished. Of course, there were stresses from other sources, but they were finally getting away from the Jedi Order, and by doing that they were escaping the life of a general and such. They did worry about the men they served with, but there was this element that beset each of them, one that gave them a sense of completion, yet their fulfillment of heart was not finished yet. There were conversations that varied about a number of different things, and Anakin said that if they stayed on Ahch-To for a while, then he might go to Dagobah and do his own vision work. But Obi-Wan had, since their journey began, started looking into what was on Ahch-To, according to records set by Professor Huyang. And as it turns out, there was a way for individuals to understand the Force in all its aspects on the island. The Jedi of the past had a larger grasp of the Force, and while they weren't fond or even accepting of the dark side of the Force, there were a means to which they used it. Ahsoka asked if it was sort of like Anakin, and Obi-Wan shook his head. It was more to a learning degree. Using the dark side for the ancient Jedi was about seeking knowledge, not for war, not winning battles or defeating enemies. The ancient Jedi seemed to permit it for the usage of the Force for gaining of knowledge, which could be found in a cave somewhere on the Temple Island of Ahch-To. Obi-Wan believed that in the past, the rupture between the Jedi and Sith probably occurred when the Sith no longer wanted to abstain to a code and broke off, but he didn't know. It had happened before with many other Jedi sins, and the Lost 20 were a testament to that. How interesting. They played some board games to pass time, and for the three of them, they felt like a tiny little family. It was so perfect, and they loved every moment of it. Being like this was so much better than being forced to be warriors. For Ahsoka, it felt like her journey had truly begun. After what felt like days, they arrived on the planet of Ahch-To. They made their way down to a small landing zone and dropped down. Thankfully, they took the shuttle and not a larger Jedi ship. If they had, R2 wouldn't have been able to land anywhere. Anakin told R2 to stay with the ship. He did, because as he looked up, he could see what seemed to be billions of stairs. Anakin shoved Ahsoka and told her he raced her to the top. Obi-Wan looked at the two of them with confusion, and Ahsoka stumbled to the ground before getting up and charging up the stairs after him. Obi-Wan smiled, but he wasn't going to participate in that. This was a very common thing between Anakin and Ahsoka specifically. They were more like brother and sister, so they acted like it. Obi-Wan was just happy to see Ahsoka smile again. When Obi-Wan eventually got to the top, Ahsoka and Anakin were leaning against some rocks catching their breath. There they waited for Obi-Wan. There was a village of some sorts of fish people, and Obi-Wan told them that they were caretakers. They likely had taken care of the Jedi structures for over a millennia. Obi-Wan continued and asked them if they felt anything. Both Anakin and Ahsoka closed their eyes, and Obi-Wan looked around. He knew where they were going, but he was curious to see if Skywalker or Tano would pick up on it. Ahsoka did first, and they followed Ahsoka across the grass and up a number of stairs. Anakin looked down and over the hills, stopping in front of Kenobi as they ascended the mountain island. Obi-Wan asked what it was, and Anakin said it was something that was calling to him. Obi-Wan told him to trust his instincts as he carried on following behind Ahsoka. Anakin looked up and watched his master get further and further away from him. He then looked back down the mountain and knelt to the ground. He could hear whispers coming down from below, and so he started walking back down the mountain. Obi-Wan walked around the corner and found Ahsoka looking at a mist surrounding some large object. She was stopped in her tracks, and she turned back to Obi-Wan. He smiled and nodded his head, telling her to not be afraid. Ahsoka walked towards the tree and the mist began to clear, or more or less she became one with the mist and found a doorway of sorts. She walked into it and looked around, feeling the walls. She noted how incredibly protected this place felt, and she walked around where a little bit of natural light visibly lit up a small bookshelf. On the shelf were a number of books, and they were sitting there without having moved in centuries. She stepped forward and felt the book, wiping dust off the side of it, and picked it up gently. It felt like the force around her changed, and the moment she felt the book, she believed there was a desirable future that she hadn't yet seen before. Anakin, on the other hand, walked to a hole in the ground and stepped forward lightly. He was ripped in by the force and slipped into the water. What was happening? Anakin choked on water as he climbed up out of the water and got onto the rocks. He coughed out the water that was stuck in his throat. He looked up, and then he was tripped into a vision. The Force was strong in Ahch-To. Luckily for Anakin, he might get the vision he was due for without having to travel to Dagobah. He could hear a man calling his name, and Anakin walked forward. There was a reflective glass in front of him, but he didn't see himself. He saw an individual with a hood over their head, and a number of familiar voices crawled over his shoulders, and when he yelled out, telling the voices to get out of his head, he looked up and saw himself. It was him, and he had yellow eyes. The other version of Anakin told him to not allow himself to destroy everything. Leave while you can. Anakin was thrown backwards and rolled out of the vision, looking up, still drenched in water. As he looked around and felt his hands and his arms and his chest, he was still alive. The Anakin he was looking at was broken apart, disfigured in more ways than just one. He couldn't believe it, and it was so uncanny to the eye. Skywalker knew he had to make his way topside. By the time he got up there, it was nighttime. During the vision, he missed the radiant sunset of the planet, but he was able to find the small camp at the top of the island where Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were. They were talking about the texts, sitting right next to each other as Obi-Wan pointed things out in the books that Ahsoka was holding. They were having a great time. It was adorable to Anakin. They looked like a father or even grandfather and daughter talking about things. He was passing knowledge down to her and even learning quite a few things himself. Obi-Wan was really well educated, so his understanding was beyond that of even what Ahsoka expected. Anakin's shadow caught their attention and they both turned over with glowing smiles, asking him to come sit with them. Anakin smiled, grateful for the welcoming procession. Anakin sat down on the other side of Ahsoka and asked what they were looking at. They both explained everything to Anakin and he was genuinely surprised about it all, but he was glad to see that they were learning something new. Obi-Wan asked Anakin what he discovered, and Anakin told them about the vision and the cave here on Ahch-To. Ahsoka was surprised, but to Obi-Wan it seemed reasonable. The ancient Jedi had a lot of different connections to the Force, long before the politics of the Council and the Order itself. They listened to Anakin's vision, and he said that he would likely go back to Coruscant, and asked if Obi-Wan had any advice, and he told his former student just to trust himself. There was an elder individual who would approach him and use Anakin's trust for him against him. Anakin understood that, but hearing it from Obi-Wan helped him solidify the notion in his mind of what he saw in the vision. He then stood up and smiled, telling them to tell him if they decided to bounce off world again. They both looked up and nodded their heads with a smile. Anakin would hike his way down to his vessel and depart for the core to be with Padme for the time being. The whole dynamic in their relationship had changed, and Anakin had a lot to learn about his obsessive tendencies in a relationship where they actively were in each other's presence. It was a big change of pace, but it allowed the married couple to actually develop some semblance of communication between the two of them. It was something they drastically needed, and while Padme's schedule was something difficult to get used to, he got it down eventually and learned to lean away from his obsessive tendencies. On Ahch-To, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would spend weeks deep diving through the ancient Jedi texts and learning more about the Force and the Jedi of the past. This was an ancient past that had been preserved thanks to the caretakers. Ahsoka wished to do something for them, but they didn't want anything for what they had done. They were protected on the island thanks to the Jedi of old, and they didn't want any way of thanks for their safety. There was something incredibly special about the texts that Ahsoka found here on Ahch-To. They showed things that not even the temple on Coruscant had records of. Sure, there might have been records of some things, but the majority of the information in the books was stuff that restricted section archives didn't even have. Obviously some things were kept, but most of it was lost to time inside the books. One thing that stood out to Ahsoka was the location of other Jedi and Sith planets. She found it peculiar that the Jedi would mention these things, but the purpose for the knowledge was for whoever read these texts to learn about them. Ahsoka wasn't all that interested in the Sith. She believed that they would be dealt with by the Council at some point or another. She was much more interested in following the journey laid out before her inside the caves of Dagobah. Over the past couple of weeks, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan went down to the caves of the island on Ahch-To, but they had similar visions to what they had before on Dagobah. The only difference was a lack of a dark Anakin for Ahsoka's vision and the lack of Mandalore for Obi-Wan's. Ahsoka was reading through the Jedi locations while Obi-Wan was meditating at the top of the mountain. It was a remarkable sunset and she was enjoying her read until she learned about something peculiar. It was the Bushido Order, more or less a sect of the Jedi Order that was for its wisest members. Though this order had more or less abstained to peace, it was similar to the sect that was from the planet Andrillion. Unlike the Atar from the Temple of Boktar, the members of the Bushido Order were not pacifists, though they were too destroyed by the Sith for simply existing. They gave the Sith their best shot. Regardless, as Ahsoka read, their temple was located on a planet called Litor, and the specifics of this order were not recorded in the Jedi texts. They were simply given a mention which for Ahsoka piqued her interest, though there was an issue. Litor, because of it being part of the Bushido Order, was not on any public records for over a millennia, not even on Jedi records. It was impossible to track down the Bushido, which is why they were likely simply forgotten to time once the Sith got to them. Litor wasn't a world the Jedi Order even went to. The only specific thing about the Bushido was 7 key pieces, though they were not translated to Galactic Common. Ahsoka put them in the words, but she was unaware of even what they were pronounced or even if they were pronounced right. She just hoped that when Obi-Wan came down, he might have heard of these 7 pieces of the Bushido. It was Chugi, Makoto, Jin, Mio, Yu, Ri, and Ji. Nothing else was known aside from that, and she was left in the dark, with only to wonder what lay on Litor. Ahsoka got impatient, and instead of waiting, she got up to the top of the mountain to find Obi-Wan meditating. His body was completely off the ground, with several rocks floating around him and on the platform. He could feel Ahsoka's presence and slowly let his feet fall below his body as the rocks returned to their places and his feet touched the meditation rock. He turned back to Ahsoka with a bit of pain on his face and asked what the matter was. She asked him the same question right back. Obi-Wan stepped down and got his boots and started putting them on. He said that they had an adversary who was hell-bent on tracking them down and destroying them. Obi-Wan said that he believed it was Maul, but he was unsure of how that could be. Perhaps he survived Mandalore. Ahsoka shrugged her shoulders. She wasn't sure. Obi-Wan lifted the pessimism away from himself and turned optimistic and suggested that whatever Maul was running from would likely find him before he found the two of them. Ahsoka smiled and said that she wanted to try and find a lost planet. Obi-Wan got his boots on and asked her about it as they walked through the hallowed hall of the Jedi and out the side of the mountain. She told him that it was something about a Bushido Order. It felt like it was calling to her. Obi-Wan nodded his head. and said that if it calls to her, then that's what they should search for. They continued talking about it until they got to their camp to sleep for the night. In the morning, they were right back up and preparing to continue the next leg of their journey. While the planet Elator was lost to public records and even to the Jedi, the planet of Andrelion wasn't. The only reason for that is there was a small local population that had a communication within the wider galaxy, though Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would not be going anywhere near that group of people. Instead, they would be traveling to the far side of the planet. All the separate sects of the Jedi Order typically kept in touch with each other. While Obi-Wan didn't want to admit it, Ahsoka did. The Jedi in their own way were the elitist organization, and once the smaller groups broke off during the era of the Old Republic and even a few during the High Republic, it was clear the Jedi did not care for them at all. The Jedi got themselves tighter with the Republic, and they also lost their way with the Force, whereas these other groups became closer tied to what the Jedi were supposed to be. The lightsaber was not what made a Jedi, and Ahsoka was very critical of the Order for not even listening to their own lessons. Regardless, when they arrived on Andrelion, they found the Temple of Bo-Katan and journeyed into it. The Yat-Tar-Run were destroyed centuries before the destruction of Bushido. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan split up and began to scour the temple. Their hope was that they would find some remnant of this Bushido order in their records here, but most of everything was destroyed. While the Yat-Tar-Run was never remotely close to the size of the Jedi Order, those who were here millennia ago were nothing but a few remaining bones, rusted lightsabers, and dust. Both Jedi could almost hear the dead speaking to them through the walls. It was painful, but the reality is, the Yat-Tar-Run were slaughtered. Obi-Wan was searching their archives, or what was left of them. Ahsoka was in the council chambers, and she knelt down on the floor. She put her hand on the floor and felt the force. The Yat-Tar-Run Council reached out to the Bushido before their demise, and Ahsoka could feel it. She had never used psychometry before, but she was shocked and jumped to her feet. Her eyes were wide open as she looked at her hands and then to the ground. She knew what psychometry was because it was something that Quinlan Vos used a number of times, but it was one of those numerous force powers inside the text that she found on Ahch-To as well. Psychometry was alongside a number of other things such as force heal, and while she knew that psychometry was mostly born with talent, some could develop it through intense training or with an openness to the force as they got older. She closed her eyes and she felt her head. She was back inside the chamber, and it wasn't destroyed, but it was just a flash. It didn't move or last more than a second or two. Was she able to use psychometry? Ahsoka got back down on her knees and felt the floor. Her hands laid out on the untouched floors of the temple and felt the force. She could feel so much, the echoes and the indistinguishable cries of younglings and the teachers as the Sith slaughtered them. The sounds of bodies hitting the floor, and the silence that followed for days turned to centuries. Ahsoka tried clambering back further. She wanted to see if she could hear something from the voices of the past. She found herself inside the council chambers of the Yat-Tar-Run, and they were talking to 3 members. 3 individuals who were holding out a small cube. They said that the cube was a wayfinder to get to their planet. It could only be used by the light, so the Jedi would not be able to come to their establishment, or at least in theory they wouldn't be able to, because of their connection to the Republic and so on. Ahsoka could feel the presence of the wayfinder, which altered her to the knowledge that it was probably still here on Andrelion. But she couldn't know of where it was at the moment because she left the past and returned to the present. She got up and continued her search, looking at the ancient walls of what had been an ancient beauty of the Yat-Tar-Run, when they still lived, of course. Obi-Wan hadn't found a thing inside the archives and eventually found Ahsoka sitting on the steps of the temple. He asked her if she was okay, and she turned around with a slight smile, and said that she could use psychometry. Obi-Wan just told her that he was thankful that she wasn't anything like Quinlan. She let out a small laugh and then said that there was a way to find the Bushido Order lost on Elator. Obi-Wan asked how, and she said it was a small wayfinder that was shaped like a cube. Obi-Wan asked her if she had any knowledge of where it could be, and she shook her head. Obi-Wan nodded his, and said that they should set up camp, and she asked why. Obi-Wan said that Andrelion had weird cycles, and it was potentially one of those weird cycles at the moment. The planet was certainly hospitable, but the climate rapidly changed. Sometimes the planet could be covered in rainstorms or sleet or snowstorms. It just varied on what time of year it was, or even what year it was. During certain parts of the year, the day could be very short or very long. That's all that was remotely close to what he said about the planet. Ahsoka got up and prepared their camp, which was situated under the shuttle. Once the camp was set up, they began to scour the temple again. It'd be an arduous journey, but it would have both Obi-Wan and Ahsoka treading dangerous storms and facing puzzles and challenges that led to nothing. It was intentional. While the Yat-Tar-Run had no reason to believe the Sith would find them, or even come for them, they still made sure that the Bushido were kept safe. This went both ways, though the main difference is the Bushido didn't have to hide the location of Andrelion, because it was on star maps already, and constantly recorded on star maps. Regardless of such, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were having no luck until one day, after what seemed to be a month, Anakin showed up. It wasn't an actual month, instead it was actually a couple months. Both were curious as to why Anakin and Padme showed up, but as it turns out they missed a lot. Anakin explained that the war got heated, and He was getting contact from both Yoda and Palpatine. In fear of the vision, he kept himself hidden from both of them. But the Battle of Coruscant happened. It was fairly convoluted, but Anakin explained it as best he could. He said that after Palpatine was rescued, rumors confirmed that Count Dooku was able to kill a Jedi Master on the Invisible Hand before his retreat. The Chancellor executed some sort of order that turned all the clones against the Jedi. Anakin asked if they were able to feel such death through the Force, and the two of them nodded their heads. They didn't know what it was because they were in the middle of the Force. Today was their first day back at the temple. Anakin asked what they were back from, but they told him to continue on. Skywalker told them that after the clones killed the Jedi, the Chancellor named himself as Emperor of the Galaxy. And then the war kind of came to an end. Or at least that's what it seemed, because both Palpatine and Dooku were reported as dead in the same night. Dooku slain inside the Castle Sereno and Palpatine gutted inside of his office in the Senate building. Anakin said he was unaware of what it was, but after Padme gave birth to the twins, he told her they were going to run away. Not back to Naboo, but to their friends to make sure they were alright. Anakin was glad to see that they were indeed alright. He did say that Padme and him talked, and they wanted to offer them a place to stay on Naboo, because that's where we're going next. Considering by public and clone perception, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan were still both Jedi. They looked at each other and told Anakin they wouldn't be going. They had spent the last couple months siphoning through information to find the Wayfinder. It was nearly impossible, and Anakin nearly fell asleep listening to it. Why were they searching for it so hard? Ahsoka explained the Bushido to him and why she wanted to go to Lator. She wanted to learn about this sect of the Jedi Order. Anakin asked what she meant, and she explained that there were different versions of the Jedi Order. Anakin jokingly asked why one of those didn't pick him up, until she revealed that they were all destroyed. Anyways, Anakin said that he and Padme were going back to Naboo. If they wanted to come, they were more than welcome. They stayed for the night before leaving in the morning. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka returned to the hunt to see if they could find this Bushido Wayfinder. Obi-Wan then suggested something to Ahsoka that seemed dumb on the surface but could actually make a lot of sense. He said that the Jedi Council chambers on Coruscant were outfitted with secrets that only Council members knew of. There were holes in the floor and had things that were hidden on the walls, mostly artifacts, but unless the Sith was once a Jedi, then the chances are that they wouldn't find anything inside the chambers. It was possible. He theorized that it could be the same with the Atar Run, considering they were once a part of that same order. Ahsoka thought this would be a good idea, and so they went to the broke-down council chambers of the fallen religious sect. They walked around the room. Ahsoka was looking under chairs and stuff while Obi-Wan did the same. All of a sudden, a lightsaber ignited and Obi-Wan yelled out in pain. He luckily had avoided a deadly strike, but Maul had found them. He lunged forward and Obi-Wan dropped to the ground. Ahsoka turned back and ignited her weapons and looked at Maul. He hissed, telling them that he searched the entire galaxy looking for them. He lost everything because of those fools. The Mandalorians didn't beat him individually, but they turned on him and forced him away from Mandalore. His entire criminal empire was crippled and he was left with nothing but himself again. Now he would strike them down and get revenge for what they took from him. Obi-Wan wasn't listening because he saw a glimmer at the back of the room. It was under a chair and located at the edge of the wall. Maul was furious. He went through so much just to lose it all. To make things worse, the Mandalorians who forced him from Mandalore were defeated by Bo-Katan and her rebels. All the criminal organizations believed he was weak and left him behind as well. All thanks to Gar Saxon's henchmen, who reached out to the Pikes, Dryden Voss, and the Black Suns and told them about Maul and how he was setting them up for failure. He raged. He continued to build things up for someone to take it all away from him. First his entire life to lose his legs to Kenobi, then his recovery and his brother to be lost to Sidious, and now his criminal empire and his potential power lost to Kenobi and some Togruta girl he didn't even know the name of. This was ridiculous. Maul launched himself across the room. Not for nothing, Obi-Wan wasn't concerned about Ahsoka. She was firstly, Anakin's student, and secondly, more than equipped to handle Maul. She would be fine on her own. He, on the other hand, crawled over to behind the seat and found what he was looking for, though there was a sharp edge. He turned his head back to see the side of the boom. He then looked under the chair and saw a small latch, and so he pulled it. The floor dropped out from under him and he fell flat on his face. This temporarily knocked him out. Ahsoka was so focused on the fight that she didn't even notice Obi-Wan's disappearance. He was alive, and so he wasn't of any concern to her. She batted back every attempt Maul gave. He was fighting with power and precision, but Ahsoka had defended herself from the likes of Grievous twice. Maul was nothing. She used her flexibility to bend backwards to avoid a couple strikes being made by the former Sith. Maul launched himself at her, which forced her out an already broken window to the exterior of the temple. She and Maul continued their fight in the forestation. Inside the chambers, Obi-Wan looked up. He could hear the fighting, but it was very distant. He jumped to his feet and scanned the area. He was below the temple. Would have made a lot more sense had they done this months ago. No one gets it right the first time, but come on, maybe the second or third? Unlike the temple on Coruscant, the council chambers were on the ground level, not above anyone else. Huh, maybe there's a reason for that. Anyways, Obi-Wan closed his eyes and felt at the forest, trying to find the Wayfinder. Maul and Ahsoka cut through the brush as she used the Force to push her back. He slid his feet across the mud, and he looked at her with anger, but she stood up with an arrogant look on her face. Maul paced to the side and asked if she was Kenobi's student. She smiled and said that she was much worse than that. Maul realized she was once removed from being his student. Ah yes, the legacy for a Jedi. That was very important. A master to student. Their student bond was so integral to their order. Well, he might as well make Kenobi hurt even more. If Ahsoka died, Obi-Wan just not failed himself, but whoever trained his student. The two of them re-engaged, and Obi-Wan was able to find the Wayfinder. He grabbed it and used the Force to launch himself back into the chambers. He closed the latch and ran out the same window the other two had just left through before. Obi-Wan got to the shuttle and prepared for it to lift off. He could still hear the fighting going on in the background. He set the autopilot up and ran to the ramp and looked down at Maul and Ahsoka. Maul got extremely upset, and he was distracted, which allowed Ahsoka to launch herself up and kick him in the cheek, throwing him from his seat to the ground. Obi-Wan told Maul that perhaps he'd have better luck in their next lifetime. Maul looked over as Obi-Wan helped Ahsoka into the ship and ran back to the ship's controls and blew Maul's vessel to pieces before ditching the planet. As they left, all they could hear was Maul screaming into the distance. Maul didn't know there was a civilian population on the planet, a population on the polar opposite side of the planet, so he just assumed he was stuck. And he pretty much was. Ahsoka sat down in the Bay Area and caught her breath, asking if he found what they were looking for. Obi-Wan smiled. He raised his hand and showed her the cube. He handed her the cube and told her to do the honors. They were currently sitting right outside the atmosphere, and Ahsoka opened up the panels in the ship's mainframe and attached the cords to the cube, and allowed the system to take control of all the information. It was literally just a star map, and it plugged all the data into the hyperdrive, and within moments, their shuttle departed into hyperspace. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka moved back to the bay of the ship. Ahsoka was going to help patch up Obi-Wan's shoulder. Luckily, the blade didn't go all the way through, so it wouldn't completely impair him. But it did do a significant amount of damage. Though there was one thing Ahsoka didn't tell Obi-Wan she learned. It's not because she was actively trying to hide it, she just didn't think it was that big of a deal. She got some Bacta in case it didn't work and placed her hand up to the wound and gently closed her eyes. Obi-Wan turned back and asked her what she just did. He wasn't feeling any pain. The adrenaline from Undrillion helped him with that, but at the same time he was a little taken aback how the pain just seemingly vanished within a moment of her applying the Bacta patch. When he turned back, he looked at the patch in her hand and then to her, asking what she just did. Ahsoka said that while she was searching through the old texts, she found that there was an ability to use Force Heal, so she taught herself how to do it with an injured Borg when he wasn't around. It wasn't too difficult. The text read it very easily for her, so when she put it to practice, it took a moment, but it eventually worked. She then shook her hand off a little bit, having felt that little bit of force leave her body and transfer into his, replacing the injury entirely. Ahsoka sat down next to Obi-Wan and asked if he was alright, and he laughed and told her that he was good as new. He then asked Ahsoka what she was looking to find on Lator. She shrugged her shoulders and said that in reality, it could be anything, she just didn't know yet. Perhaps it would be what remained of an old Jedi Order of Bushido. Obi-Wan asked her what she would do with it. While the Jedi Order had seemingly collapsed, what was she to do? Obi-Wan was here for the long ride with her, but learning all this information had to mean something. Spending months away from the Order and having watched the galaxy crumble was something that they ultimately had to come to terms with, but they also needed to find their place in the galaxy as it began to reshape. Ahsoka sat silently, and said she didn't know. Part of her had an answer, but to her it seemed kinda goofy. She was hoping she could bring the Jedi with her, and do what the Aturun and Bushido did. With the Order destroyed, surely there weren't that many survivors left, let alone survivors that'd like to be a part of some new Jedi Order. She voiced her thoughts to Obi-Wan and said it was really silly of her to think it was a good idea, but Obi-Wan dismissed those doubtful thoughts. He told her that what she wanted was within her grasp, but she needed to believe in herself. There were survivors of the Clone Wars and the Purge, and they would need a home. If she was willing, she could bring her vision into reality. Ahsoka nodded her head, and Obi-Wan thanked her again for healing him as he moved to the cockpit of the ship. Ahsoka leaned her head back and lay down on a couple of seats. Her eyes looked at the walls sideways until she twisted to look at the ceiling. Her eyes closed, and she was transported to the visions she'd been having. It was always the same little girl running up to her and taking her somewhere she'd never been before. Every vision she had from Dagobah to Ahch-To, and yet she couldn't figure out why it was happening. Why was this girl so attached to her hip? It did make Ahsoka sad in her heart. Despite the happy smile she wore most of the time, she was quite sad that she couldn't have more Jedi with her on this journey. Obi-Wan was great company, and Anakin, when he was around, was also great company. When Ahsoka woke up, Obi-Wan told her that they were arriving at Lator. The planet was gorgeous, and it had a nice ring that circled the exterior of the planet. The two of them got to their seats and piloted the ship down through the clouds and landed on the far side of a brush. They had an idea of where the Bushido Temple was, but they weren't going to land close to it. The area was too heavily wooded and they couldn't even see it. When the Jedi landed, they walked out and noted how beautiful the landscape was. It was humid to a degree, but with the wind crawling off the water, it took all their issues with humidity away. Obi-Wan told Ahsoka that they could split up again if they wanted, and she shook her head. She said that they should stay together. The temple had to be around here somewhere. Ahsoka walked forward to a clearing and some brush and looked out across the waters. She turned and asked Obi-Wan if he was feeling it. He nodded his head. The planet was so alive with the Force. She pointed in the direction across the water and suggested that they go that direction. She thought she could see something glimmering in the tree line. The two of them started their hike through the woods. After a short hike, they came across some ruins. It didn't look all that big, but Ahsoka noted that she could see the 7 names from the book on Ahch-To here. Obi-Wan asked what they were. He wasn't looking at the old structure, she was. She said the names Chugi, Makoto, Jin, Mio, Yu, Ri, and Ji. Obi-Wan looked back at her and then wondered if this was all they had to examine. Perhaps the Bushido had long since vanished from this planet. Ahsoka shook her head. She said that unlike the Temple of Bo-Katan, this place wasn't riddled with death. She couldn't feel any darkness. It seemed like Lator was all peaceful. Obi-Wan did agree. He could feel that too. Maybe it was something else. Ahsoka looked back. It was something else. Whatever it was, she didn't know, but it was very peculiar. Something didn't feel right. She asked if they thought that Maul could trace them here. Obi-Wan shook his head. It was very unlikely that he did. He didn't even have a ship. Ahsoka looked down and examined a fresh trail. She called Obi-Wan's name and he came over and looked at it. It looked like some sort of animal, but where there are animals, there was typically fresh water. If the Bushido built a large temple that wasn't this structure, it could probably be close to that freshwater supply, similar to what the Ahch-To one did. They followed the trail. It seemed like a large deer breed of sorts. They continued along the trail and found the temple, though it was gorgeous, pristine as if it had been maintained until this very day. All of a sudden, a number of lightsabers ignited from the tree line, and the 2 former Jedi ignited their weapons and got to each other's back. Obi-Wan told whoever it was that they weren't here to fight. A voice in the crowd stepped forward and asked what they were doing here. He wore all white robes that flowed elegantly across his body. His smile could blind you, and he turned to the other individuals who exited from the tree line to extinguish their swords. From the trees came a dozen men and women wearing garments that looked very similar to that of the Jedi Temple guards. Ahsoka asked what was going on here, and the man introduced himself as Master Respect. She asked what he meant by that, and he stopped her by raising his hand. He told her that they were visitors, and he would like to know why they came here, or even how they got here. Never had a Jedi step foot on Lator. She looked at Obi-Wan, who said that they were no longer Jedi. Master Respect asked what he meant by that, and Ahsoka explained the entire situation, even showing them the cube from the Temple of Bo-Katan. After she explained it, she said that there was no more order. Respect was silent. He didn't say a word. He turned to the guards, and they each removed their helmets. They all knelt to the ground at once, and Master Respect told her that he would like to bring her somewhere. He tapped on his wrist and summoned the other masters with similar names, each of their names going by so quickly Obi-Wan and Ahsoka couldn't catch them all. They rang out as integrity, honor, loyalty, courage, honesty, and compassion. What odd names. Kenobi and Ahsoka looked at each other as Master Respect informed them that they had been awaiting their arrival. For Obi-Wan, this was giving him Kaminoan flashbacks, and he had a really bad feeling about this. Moments later, 6 others would arrive, and they would greet Ahsoka and Obi-Wan with great excitement and happiness. They brought with them a hologram, and they dropped it on the ground. A message popped up, and it formed in front of the 2 former Jedi. It was a message from the original 3 Masters of the Bushido Order. They welcomed the individuals who came to Lator, and told them that their belief was in the future the Jedi would see their wronging, and a time would come when a Seeker would come out and find them, and their orders spread out across the galaxy. The middle one said that the one who initiated the journey was chosen by the Force to bring together the orders and establish what was right for the former Jedi. The man on the left said that under the will of the Force, the Jedi by this point had either gotten too corrupt for their own good and crumbled, or they were on the verge of destruction. The Seeker would save those who had survived if it was the first situation, or have the chance to save the Order if it was the second. The man on the right said that whoever he or she was had their eternal gratitude. They were a messenger of the Force, one to bring together what had been broken and disregarded. The 3 spoke together in synchronization, and then said that as Bushido they had integrity, courage, honor, honesty, respect, and compassion. As Bushido they were united with the Force in their quest to become the truest versions of themselves. One last time they collectively spoke and welcomed the Seeker. Obi-Wan took a step back. This was Ahsoka's mantle. Just as Anakin was the chosen one, Ahsoka was definitely the Seeker. Her journey had just begun. Ahsoka was genuinely nervous. She stood still for a moment, but the Masters told her to not be afraid. She had come this far. Her presence in the Force was soothing and warm. She was to be what the Ancients believed she would be. She would guide 2 different orders into one. Of course, with the apparent loss of the former Jedi Order, she would do as the Ancients suggested, bring the survivors here as a guide. Ahsoka looked at the Masters and they waved their hands and asked her to follow. All the guards who were kneeling lifted up in one simultaneous motion and put their helmets over their heads. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan followed through a rough patch of trees until they laid their eyes on a beautiful temple, one protected and safe within the natural elements. It was a cocoon, a safe haven for all Force wielders, safe from war and safe from the challenges the galaxy divided could press against them. They avoided the Jedi and the Sith wars. They had seen no conflict since their founding. While they were trained, they held near and dear the original meaning for the Jedi. The original intent, that wars not make one great, and that a lightsaber was only a tool, not a personality. Master Respect informed them all about the way of the Seeker, and how she was interconnected through all of their art. Though he did apologize for their original hostility. They were the only beings who brought people to Lator. No one came alone. It was only known by those of the Bushido, and it was intended to be that way. Ahsoka had so many questions, but she was left speechless. While it wasn't quite the same size as the temple on Coruscant, the aura here of the Bushido was peaceful, it was beautiful, it was untouched by disaster. The Seven Masters collectively stopped and told Ahsoka that she, as a Seeker, could represent something the Seven couldn't. While there were 7 Masters, each representing and holding the name of one of the 7 values of the Bushido, there were 4 of the Masters who represented elements of the planet they resided on. This was to mirror what the original 3 had laid out. The original 3, who were left to right, integrity, honor, and courage, were also represented left to right as fire, water, and wind. The 4th member to join their ranks would be deemed as Master Loyalty, and she would represent the Lator, or the land. The original 4 believed the Seeker would inhibit the role of the last, which connected all 4 elements of the Lator. As Ahsoka turned to look at a mural left behind on the wall, she saw 4 figures. It was the 4 original Masters of the Order. In each of their hands was their element, and the sign of their element. Before the 4 died, they had a collective vision of a Togruta Seeker, one who would unite the Order with what was abandoned on Tython. The art depicted showed a Togruta at the center of the 4 Masters, with the Void symbol. Ahsoka looked at it, and she felt a swelling of emotions from within her. She didn't know how to feel, and logistically, how could she? The 4 Masters to replace the original 4 walked forward, their golden robes clinging behind them as they stood before the mural. They held their hands up, and from their hands a symbol of their elements were displayed, and they requested that Ahsoka kneel before them. She started forward and Obi-Wan backed away, watching in awe, as another religion perfected what the Jedi could not. The Bushido had total peace, and they had it because they didn't play politics. Ahsoka walked forward and she knelt to the ground. The Bushido Masters asked her if she was willing to walk the path of the Bushido and become the first Seeker the Order ever had, and the only they would ever have. She accepted. They continued in synchronization, asking Ahsoka if she'd be willing to bring 2 worlds together so that they could strive for what the true intentions of a long-gone Jedi Order wanted. She accepted. The 4 members asked Ahsoka if she would serve with them as the 8th member of their council and represent not just the Jedi, but the Bushido as the one who could walk both paths. Ahsoka agreed, and they requested that she close her eyes and allow the Force to pass into her. It was hard for Ahsoka. She was 17 years old at this point, and she was really beginning to start a journey she did not know how to prepare for. But she did. It was hard, but she did it. The Force was opened up, and once she allowed the Force and Lator to pass into her, she became a beacon of light. The other 3 council members, the ones who didn't have an element to represent, came forward. Respect, honesty, and compassion, pulled a white robe over her shoulders and slid her arms into the sleeves. Master Respect walked around the front of her and knelt down, laying Kyber crystal around her neck and gently releasing it so it could fall. As Ahsoka was in the Force, she could feel the hypersensitivity of the crystal as it connected to her soul, as if it was always waiting for her. In reality, it had been. The crystal was found by the original Master, Master Honor. He kept it and believed that one day the Seeker would be able to hold it and use it for good. Once the crystal fell down against her gently, her hood was raised above her head, and it was rested gently over her tails. Ahsoka didn't move, and then the 4 told Ahsoka that she would raise her hands before her and cup them, so that she may present herself with the element of the Void. A radiance fled from her body, and as her arms reached out in front of her, a symbol of the Void appeared, just as it had for the other 4 elements. They told Ahsoka to rise. By this point, hundreds of members had gathered in the hall to see this. Ahsoka's first foot landed beneath her, and then her second. As she rose, she felt the galaxy surround her. She was the Void, she was a Seeker, and she stepped forward. The council raised their hands, and Ahsoka raised both of hers. The temple illuminated in a gorgeous glow. The floor lit up, and the walls where the mural was did too. All the other Bushido, whether they be student, guardian, or instructor, put their hands on each other's shoulders, and they began concentrating on the Force. They began chanting the 7 values, but in the original dialect. Ahsoka turned to face hundreds of members, and she could feel the Force radiate from within them. A beam of light shot into the sky from behind them. The Force was one with each and every single one of them in this moment. Minutes later, Ahsoka would be taken on a journey across the entire temple. The 7 masters would show her the Bushido Temple, which they called the Dojai Temple. Something that was unveiled to Ahsoka is that the Bushido did the opposite of the Jedi. Those who were rejected by the Jedi were brought here to Lator, and the Bushido made a rule that would allow families to visit their loved ones or live here with them. Their belief was that all were gifted by the will of the Force, so why restrict anything if they were all gifted? Of course, their teachings revolved around rejecting darkness, but here on Lator, there was no darkness for them to interact with. The Bushido were in complete control over everything here on the planet, and coincided beautifully with the code of ethics. Ahsoka was amazed, but she asked how they avoided being seen for so long. They expressed that despite their code, they showed themselves off as Jedi. It was to ease the hearts of families to make them more comfortable with what they were doing. It was the only lie they told to them. They were allowed to see their children's home and learn about what their children were being taught. The Bushido believed so deeply in attachments and connections that family residences were built within the temple itself. It was incredible, and then they were shown the council chambers. It was much different than the ones that belonged to the Jedi on Coruscant. It was an amphitheater of sorts. But essentially, whoever wanted to listen to the council could listen. When the tour was over, the council brought Ahsoka to the Seeker's room and told Obi-Wan that he'd be able to stay down the hall from Ahsoka. He thanked them for their kindness before they dispersed. Ahsoka asked Obi-Wan to come in and talk with her because she had a lot of worry on her mind. Obi-Wan kind of figured, which is exactly why he was ready for any questions or concerns she had. When they went to the room, they sat down at a small table and spoke to each other. Ahsoka said she was afraid. How could she bridge a gap between the Jedi and the Bushido? She was just a child. Obi-Wan told her that while she might be young, she was still so mature. They weren't asking her to be the Grand Master or the Chancellor. They were asking her to connect both worlds. And being that they allowed families to reside here, Obi-Wan slid a communication device across the table. He told her that she knew where to start. She just had to slow down her mind and calm her heart. Trust the instincts and trust the Force. Ahsoka told him that she didn't know how to bridge that gap. She didn't know or have what it took. He smiled and told her that she had everything she needed. Ahsoka thanked Obi-Wan for all the guidance he bestowed on her over the past couple of months. She expressed that she didn't know where she'd be without him. Obi-Wan said that she would have found her way eventually. He stood up and told her that he was proud of her. Ahsoka smiled and then looked down at the communication device. As Ahsoka contacted Skywalker and explained everything to him, Obi-Wan was invited by the Council Masters to join them in the traditional ceremony, one that took place right outside the temple. Obi-Wan listened and he followed the Masters out to a beach where there was a small procession. A couple of guardians were standing there with staves as they waited for a child to be brought to him. Master Respect told Obi-Wan that if he was ready to forgo the ways of the Fallen Order, he could do the same and welcome himself into this new path. The Bushido didn't want to erase the Jedi, but their intention was to give them a fresh start. If the Jedi could receive a fresh start, then they could release their darkness and allow the light to take over. The fear for the Bushido at this point was allowing all of the Jedi from a broken order onto their planet and how it could disrupt the cosmic balance. But as they believed, all is as the Force wills. They trusted the Force, and they trusted that whatever the Force saw as imbalance would replace it with true balance. Obi-Wan saw their point, and when Master Respect finished, a small child was being held in the arms of her parents. The parents walked with the instructor down to the beach, and the parents handed their child over. The instructor put the child down into the water, but did not submerge her. The instructor instead allowed the child to naturally flow with the Force of the planet and become connected with it. The child did. The Force flowed around the child, and instead of panic or sinking, she began to float. This obviously was uncommon for children of any species aside from water species. Typically, infants weren't supposed to float like that, which is why the Bushido did this. It was a means to allow the child to cement themselves in their journey forward. The Force was every living being's ally, and the infant would give themselves into the Force at this moment and forever be tied to it instinctively. With the parents near, it made the process even easier for children. Of course, from time to time it didn't work, but the Bushido just took their time and retried until the child was ready. This did work for adults as well, but adults would be fully submerged and then released and allowed to float anew. This hadn't been done since the fall of the Auteur run on Amdrillion, mostly because no one else could get here. Kenobi asked how they got here without the Wayfinder. Master Respect smiled, and told the former Jedi that once the Force inhibits one's being, it becomes more than just a tool. As a Jedi, he was supposed to know that, understand that, but it was not his fault that he didn't. Obi-Wan was led to the waters after the child exited a member of the Bushido Order. Master Respect told Obi-Wan that for the Bushido, midichlorians did not matter. This didn't mean they didn't believe in them, rather they saw them as a simple measurement, not as a guide to allow certain individuals into their order or not. If one could use the Force at a basic level, they were given the opportunity to join, though they were also given the chance to leave. Though the reason the Order wasn't anywhere near the size of the Jedi Order is simply because of reach. They couldn't get to the far corners of the galaxy on their own, so they ended up having a large collection of members from their planet and the surrounding systems. Of course, from time to time there were moments where an individual could be brought in from a faraway planet, but that didn't happen frequently. Obi-Wan's adoration for the Order had been tested, but through everything it endured, the closest thing he found to the Jedi Order he believed he served was right here on the Torr, not on Coruscant. This is what he wanted to believe the Jedi were. While he could have his issues with the lack of their political motivation, he understood why they didn't have it. Obi-Wan told Master Respect he would like to begin his journey and become a Bushido. Master Respect smiled with a great amount of pride as he let out a slight whistle. A number of Guardians came forward and lightly stood next to Obi-Wan. Master Respect told Obi-Wan that he would have to trust them. He would have to relinquish all control over himself and allow the Force to travel through him. All of his trauma and all of his struggles from the past would ignite like a flame, but he'd be the only one capable to walk the way of the Bushido in his own mind. Kenobi nodded his head, and Respect began the ritual. Obi-Wan let go of control over his body and went dead weight in the arms of the Guardians, who were holding him. They slowly walked forward, allowing his feet to lightly drag across the sands. It was so smooth until they reached the edge of the beach where the watery sand covered his boots. Obi-Wan could feel the chilly waters that slowly rose up his legs. Under the heat of the sun on the Torr, it was such a calming feeling. The sound of the water entering his mind and the Guardians carried him out further and further, and then pushed him gently under the water. Kenobi rested his mind and allowed the Force to use him as a vessel. Everything from his past showed up, and in the moment, he had to choose the path he lay before himself. His troubles, his struggles, the pain, the loss, he let it wither away from him, and he came to a sense of peace with it all. The struggle he faced while being submerged was the loss of the Order, but that was mostly due to it having happened so recently. The destruction of the Jedi Order was a newer struggle, and because he didn't know which of his friends survived, he was left without a sense of peace, because he latched onto a moment left behind him. He wasn't able to move forward. The Bushido and their rituals believed that to have attachments was fine, and to use one's emotions was perfectly valid. However, their issue was individuals who latched onto the past and didn't let go, as if something from their past could resolve something for them in the present, which obviously was not the case. Obi-Wan went back within himself and let go of what he could not control, and then he slowly drifted up to the surface of the water. Ahsoka came out moments later as he was walked into the water and watched the entire thing. Master Respect told her that she as a Seeker would participate in it when she believed she was ready, and it might help her with her journey. Ahsoka looked at Master Respect as he turned to see loyalty and honor walking past her. The two Bushido walked down to the water and allowed their robes to be soaked by the fresh seas outside the temple. Obi-Wan at this point was floating, and there was a visible smile across his face, and Ahsoka asked the Bushido if the waters were special to any degree. He smiled and told her that they weren't special per se, but nothing is special if you don't believe it is. Ahsoka nodded her head and watched brand new white robes be pulled over Obi-Wan's shoulders as he resurfaced and took a deep breath. He felt rejuvenated. He felt free, but whole at the same time. A Bushido he was. Kenobi walked up the beach and smiled at Ahsoka. She asked how he felt, and Kenobi told her that he felt brand new. She would love the process, but it would take her letting go if she went into it. Ahsoka had some issues with letting go, and so he told her that whatever was done was done. She had no control over the past. It was gone. It was time to move on. Ahsoka nodded her head, and Master Respect told her that they would start. She did the same as Obi-Wan did, and she was taken to the water and she was submerged. Ahsoka's struggles began here. It was the war, the death, the destruction, the trial. So much on her mind. Though the water was soothing, it was peaceful, and it was giving her some aid. Kenobi and the other Bushido watched as the first minute ticked by. She didn't come out. The next minute went by, with no sign of her resurfacing. Obi-Wan was extremely nervous, but Master Respect informed Kenobi that she as a Seeker might have more difficulty with this, and they had the trust that she could do it. If she was truly the Seeker, she would rise from the water. This step forward would be her most important one. After 4 minutes, Obi-Wan was worrying, and he tried to step forward, but Master Integrity told him that he must not interrupt. This process needed to be completed by Ahsoka alone. Obi-Wan bit his lip. He wanted to say something, but this was their code, their process. He apologized for his immaturity. He was worried about his friend. Integrity turned back, and she told him that there was nothing to be sorry for. His emotions were as valid as he felt them. To be worried is natural, but the trust, that takes strength. Obi-Wan nodded his head, and they turned back to see her slowly rise from the depths of the water. Her face came out of the water, and she slowly breathed in the fresh air. She found her own sense of peace in her own way. It took Ahsoka doing as Kenobi did, but she needed to release what tension sat within her. When she realized she had the support that she needed, the path of the Seeker became much easier to accept. The challenge to be a seeker and travel the path alone is what the most daunting thing for her to accept was. But when she got around to the fact that the path wasn't just one for her to go down alone, she began floating. The few masters came up to her and placed new white robes over her shoulders as she lay on the water. Master Honor stepped forward and wrapped a golden tinsel around the edges of her robes. She, as a seeker, would have robes that identified her as who she was, the one who could walk between both worlds. When Ahsoka's eyes opened, she rose. A smile resonated from her face and she walked from the water. She looked at Master Kenobi and commented how white suited him so well. He smiled and told her that Satine used to say the same thing all the time. Ahsoka smiled and looked at the Master of the Bushido and asked what now. They told her the choice was hers. She was a seeker, and she was only capable of achieving the restructuring of the bond between the Jedi and the Bushido. Ahsoka asked if there were a way for her to meditate, and Master Respect led her to one of the meditation chambers in the temple. As they walked there, Ahsoka was able to take in much more of the scenery and see everything else in its great beauty. While the temple on Coruscant was beautiful for what it was assembled a shambles the Order was left in. And that was before the onset of Order 66. This temple here in Lator was gorgeous. Todaiji Temple was situated in the tropics, so there was a lot of open halls and windows. So much of the air in the temple was natural, and allowed for the members of the Order to connect themselves with the Force. This was a stark contrast to the fortress on Coruscant, which had very little access to the planet, the Force, or anything else aside from politics. Ahsoka was shown into the meditation chambers, and she found a number of children. They weren't referred to as younglings, instead they were all students, until they became guardians. It was so interesting to her how lax the Bushido were. The students were in here on their own will. There was no instructor watching over them. Master Respect urged her to go in and connect to the Force. She thanked him and entered. While Ahsoka was in the meditation chambers, Anakin and his little family arrived out in the little landing area where the Jedi shuttle was. Obi-Wan had since informed the Bushido that the prophesied Chosen One was coming with his small family. Truthfully, the Council was surprised that the Jedi had found their Chosen One after all these years. The prophecy was older than their order as it was. They had absolutely no issue with it, and actually got excited at the chance to meet such an individual and the family he brought. It was so interesting that the Jedi had a master of their own break away from the code so much. Obi-Wan kind of explained the situation, but wanted Anakin to be allowed to explain it himself to them when he got here. Anakin was told by Ahsoka to bring his family with him, being that the Bushido wouldn't ruin their family or so forth. Ahsoka also explained as much as she understood in the moment. Of course, Padme was relatively apprehensive about the entire thing, but she was willing to give it a try. It wouldn't be hard for it to be somewhat better of an experience than it was being on Naboo. Since the crumbling of the Jedi Order and the end of the war, the Republic itself was falling apart. This was largely in part to what Palpatine set up before his untimely demise. Everything he worked so hard for was coming to fruition, yet he wasn't around to see the product of it. While peace came easy, it was a rebuilding that fractured the already broken system. Padme and Anakin were avoiding it as much as possible, but the corruption was leaking outwards, and it was clear that those who did not support the state would be taken away. Being that Padme and her allies were all against Palpatine's motivations, the Republic could begin tracking them down for treason. Padme and Anakin landed on Lator, and they were greeted similarly to Ahsoka. With Obi-Wan wearing his white robes, he was able to clear the air and bring them towards the Todaiji Temple. On the walk from their landing zone to the temple, Master Respect informed the couple of the life they could live here. Padme could become a Bushido, but she couldn't walk the path of the Bushido. For people like Padme, where the Force wasn't strong within them, they were given a chance to be a part of the ancient religion if they wanted. Of course, if they didn't want to, then it wasn't a big deal. It was a way for the Bushido to not become hypocrites. If they told people who didn't have the ability to use the Force that they couldn't join, then they'd be no better than the Jedi. This was a very rigid and convoluted way to look at things, but it's how they saw it. Regardless of which, Master Respect had a lot of interest in the prospects of having Skywalker's family become a part of the Bushido. This wasn't a power grab, but a continuation of the journey Ahsoka was on. Anakin and Padme were both carrying Luke and Leia, and they decided that they would become a part of the Bushido Order. It would provide them safety for the time being. Also not for nothing, the tropics of Lator were truly beautiful, and the weather was to die for. Because Ahsoka was still meditating, they didn't get a chance to talk with her, but Padme and Anakin were brought over to the waters. Padme, being the mother, was given the opportunity to partake in the event, but she shook her head and suggested that Obi-Wan do it. It's not that she didn't believe she was capable, it was more or less believing that both Anakin and Obi-Wan had a power that she couldn't really understand. Because of that, she'd rather watch what happened and stand in the waters with them. Kenobi and Skywalker walked out into the waters with Padme behind them, with the children in their arms. Obi-Wan holding Leia, and Anakin holding Luke. Master Respect came into the waters with them and told them the entire process of how it'd be done. Anakin hadn't seen anything, but Obi-Wan had, so Respect wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. As the instructions were being recited to the two of them again, Obi-Wan started to zone out. He felt like he'd been here before, but he did not know why. All of it felt so natural. His vision became nothing but a silent ringing, and he looked aimlessly at the waters beyond master respect. He felt called back, and so Obi-Wan looked down to his hands, and he saw an infant. Anakin asked Obi-Wan if he was ready, and Obi-Wan looked up. He had been here before. He knew what he was doing, but he didn't. It all felt so surreal. Kenobi and Skywalker lowered the children down into the water, and allowed the Force to flow through them until they were able to float on their own, and become vessels of the living Force. It didn't take long, especially for them. And for Obi-Wan, it was funny. He couldn't tell who was in more awe, Anakin or Padme. Regardless, Luke and Leia were put into infant pods, and the process began for both Padme and Anakin. For regular people, it was obviously different, but for the most part, the beginning and the end were the same. It was just how the individual, with little ability to use the Force, was able to get there. Obi-Wan stood on the beach and watched both Padme and Anakin get submerged into the waters until they lifted up and floated on their own. The crazy thing is that they both did it at the exact same time as the other, as if one could not exist without the other. The process for Obi-Wan was really interesting because he was such a former Jedi, and to see Anakin with Padme made him naturally real, not because of them, just because of the beliefs that were instilled within him. And while it hurt him, in a selfish way, to see Anakin live the life he wanted with the person he wanted, he could not be selfish. He was happy for Anakin. His life was finally within his control, and he wasn't being prohibited by a code that he did not believe in. It was a relief for Anakin to be free, and to be one with the Bushido was just an extension of that. An instructor would come up and show them to where they'd be living. Of course, to accommodate for incoming numbers, there were newer residences on the other side of the temple. There was a small natural pool on the other side, beneath the mountains and hidden nicely within the trees. It was its own little village attached to the temple, and it was remarkable. This little village was mostly inhabited by those who were family to Force-sensitive Bushido, but if someone was like Anakin, an older individual with sensitivity to the Force, but already had an established family, this is where they went. The main point was to focus on the sense of community for those who couldn't use the Force, like the rest of the people here. By the time Padme and Anakin got themselves situated inside their new little abode, Ahsoka was coming out of her meditation. It took hours, but she felt like she knew what to do. During the meditation, she could see what was to come, and how it would undo what had already been done. It was all set in motion, and ever since her arrival here in Lator, it became more and more apparent that the Force was constantly in motion. She couldn't control what was out of her hands, but what she could do, especially now as a Seeker, is help those who felt that control was out of their hands. During her meditation, she realized that being a Seeker wasn't just being the one to bring Jedi and Bushido back into one order. It was about helping people see and seek their own paths. She was the guide, the ferry to take people to the other side of their journeys, a messenger of hope. Once Ahsoka left the meditation chambers, she would find Obi-Wan and inform him that she was ready. He asked her if she wanted his help, and she shook her head. She wanted to do this part of the journey on her own. Obi-Wan respected her wishes and watched her as she departed. Ahsoka's next year and a half would be full of twists and turns, discovering lost Jedi and leading them home. Obi-Wan became known as an instructor within the ranks of the Bushido, or in other words, continued being the rank of master. He taught the Force to students and Guardians alike. He would also care for those who were being brought back to Lator from the previously fallen Jedi Order. Former Jedi were easier to find, and this was mostly due to the onset of another war. It wasn't per se the Clone Wars, but it was a Republic civil war. This pinned clones against each other and clones against militia. Because the clones didn't have a lot of political biases, they didn't fight against each other, but they had to fight the militias and wipe the floor with them. The clones were superior fighters. This civil war became much more than a galactic-scale war. It was a system-scale war, so planets turned against each others, and so forth. The structure at the center of the galaxy crumbled, and because the clones were no longer interested in the Jedi, Ahsoka was able to save dozens. Tragically, there were only 105 survivors of the Purge. The clones were truly effective, but so was Ahsoka. She was bringing back so many former Jedi. Though what was truly heartbreaking is that almost all of them were younglings or former Padawans to some degree. This had Caleb Dume, Nari, Reva, Gungi, and Cal Kestis among members brought back to Lator to be turned into Bushido. Though Ahsoka realized about midway through the year and a half that she and other Jedi had been actively being hunted. Maul was searching for Ahsoka and Kenobi. His rage had him focused, and he also took advantage of the system that his former master was trying to implement. Sidious was going to turn former Jedi into Inquisitors, and since Maul was stronger than any Jedi Padawan or Knight he came across, he turned them into his little group of Inquisitors. They were using the darkness and the galaxy to fuel their hate, and they targeted everyone. Maul knew how to get individuals to delve further into darkness, which is exactly what he did to the poor souls who were lost. On the bright side, Ahsoka was able to save most of those who lost their way. While Ahsoka knew she was being hunted, she didn't get deterred from her path. She had gone toe-to-toe with Maul and Grievous in her time. The thought of measly Inquisitors did not frighten her. She was simply saving as many as she could. The Council of Lator could not be happier with what Ahsoka displayed in her time as a Seeker. Ahsoka was able to have visions or echoes of the original 3 Bushido in the Order, though these visions or echoes weren't exactly clear on what the message was. It was just like a consistent reminder from the elders of the Bushido that they were on her side, or at least that's how she interpreted it. Interestingly for Ahsoka, her struggles with the Jedi came with a lot of the elder members, most specifically Coleman Kaj and Jocasta Nu, but they were much easier to convince than Baylan Skoll. Luckily for Ahsoka, she was able to find Baylan and Yoda on the same planet. They weren't actively trying to be around each other, they just happened to find themselves on Saleucami at the same time. Ahsoka found Baylan first, and he was very dismissive of her request. That's until a couple hours later, she returned to him with Master Yoda. The funny thing is, despite all the knowledge Yoda had, he didn't really know much about the Bushido. He wasn't really looking forward to going to Lator, but once he arrived at the Tadai Temple, his perception changed and he became interested in what the Bushido could offer. The Order made it clear who was who, for the Jedi and the Bushido to understand why some might be a little different. It was a way for the members born into it, or already part of the Bushido, to help those recovering from Order 66. The Bushido outfitted each former Jedi with new, pure robes, but they also gave them a very charming bracelet. It was laced with Kyber crystal dust, collected from the caverns under the mountains nearby. It wasn't quite the depot that Ilum was, but for the Bushido, there was plenty of Kyber around the planet, and especially around the Tadai Temple, which explained why it was where it was. Everything was intentional with this ancient order. Yoda too, after some decent convincing, would relinquish his dedication to the former Jedi Order and dedicate himself to the Bushido, though he wouldn't be near much of anyone for too long. The Bushido had a mountain nearby, and at the top of it was an unused meditation garden. It was built nearly 300 years after the Order was founded, but at the top of Mount Kida, one could meditate until they felt their heart feel complete. Typically, only elder members of the Bushido would go up there, as it was believed it was their final journey before they became one with the Force. Yoda had no intention to die, but he went on this journey to feel the Force at the top of Mount Kida. He didn't travel with anyone other than his old friend, Master Tera Sinube. Yoda had a really difficult time adjusting with Master Sinube that, in all fairness, this was due to the fact that it wasn't Master Sinube's order, he was just a former council member. He could see the Bushido as a path forward. Yoda had to learn to let go and embrace his greatest failure. Anakin and Padme were enjoying their time on the planet, and Skywalker would join Ahsoka from time to time as she went out into the galaxy to help bring those back home. It was never easy, because so much darkness radiated in the galaxy, but with each other they were able to find success. Though the one time Obi-Wan came with, they encountered trouble on a level they hadn't seen since their time in the war. While everything was seemingly going fine, especially on Lator, the galaxy had almost completely collapsed. The Civil War ripped the core worlds apart and it drove them into a financial hole. With the Clone Wars and the Civil War that followed, the Republic and even the CIS were nothing but shambles. In the confusion and destruction, they were able to come to peace, but the death toll had already exceeded that of the Clone Wars, in less time too. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan were on Chandrilia looking for Jedi, and they found the Jedi decapitated. Of course, it had to be them. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka hadn't fought with anyone since their last encounter with Maul. They trained with the Bushido, but training wasn't nearly as aggressive or war-fixated. Maul had with him 2 Inquisitors. The others had been killed when they got stuck in between a firefight with Republic forces. Only the 3 of them survived. It was simply bad timing. This did make the 2 survivors question Maul, but he was fierce and intense, just like his master. So, he used what his master taught him against his new students. Ahsoka wasn't looking forward to this fight, but she and Obi-Wan prepared themselves. Ahsoka donned blue lightsabers and they came from the chains she went through as a Seeker. Her lightsaber steadied and Obi-Wan's did too. As Bushido members, they told their foes that they could save them. But for Maul and the Inquisitors, this wasn't delightful. They didn't care about the Jedi trying to save them. Their order was dead. Obi-Wan said there was no longer a Jedi order. It was so much more. The 2 Inquisitors looked on in a little bit of shock and lowered their guard. Maul could sense their betrayal, and without missing a beat, he spun around and caught both of them off guard, slicing through them in one perfect swing. Maul turned back and expressed that there was no saving them now. Maul leapt forward using a Sith howl and targeted Ahsoka. He saw her white robes on as a sign of weakness, and he tried to exploit it. The last time they couldn't finish their fight because of the Mandalorians, there was no one to bail Maul out of this. The lightsabers moved at the speed of light, and they were quick to defend themselves. Maul wasn't stronger than both of them combined, but even Obi-Wan didn't want to kill Maul. The path he'd been on made him want to save Maul, and this did go for Ahsoka as well. Though the bad blood between her and Maul wasn't nearly as thick as it was for him and Kenobi. Maul was fighting more aggressively than ever before, and he was stronger than he was in their last engagement. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan continued their fight. People around the city could hear the clashing of lightsabers and looked on. So many people were apprehensive because they just lived through another war. A war that was literally on their doorsteps. The city was in ruins, but as Kenobi and Ahsoka worked against Maul, she was able to kick Maul back. He staggered a little bit. He yelled at the 2 of them, and as he was distracted by what seemed to be a massive bird, a boom crashed behind him, and turned back to see Anakin Skywalker, who twisted his head a little with a grin and said hello there. Anakin had seen the fight and jumped off a building to get there. Maul raged at Anakin, but Skywalker was already 5 steps ahead of Maul. He raised his hand and used the Force to shut off Maul's mind. The Dark Lord continued running forward and dropped to the ground, and his lightsaber rolled away from him. Anakin told them that they should take Maul back to Lator. It was already long before this encounter agreed upon that if they came across this force that was chasing them, they would break the cycle. If they could stop the Sith from existing altogether, then perhaps the war between Jedi and Sith could end. Obi-Wan and Anakin picked up Maul and left Chandrilia. They were very upset about the fact that Maul killed the Jedi and the Inquisitors, and that wasn't being ignored. Instead, they were just hoping they could save a life instead of letting another one go into darkness. Upon the return to the Council in Lator, Maul would wake up and Master Respect would stand before him and ask if he was ready to let go of his hatred. Maul looked around. He was confused. Where was he? How had the Jedi multiplied so quickly? Master Respect gave Maul the time he needed and waited patiently. Maul didn't have his lightsaber, so he pulled Master Respect and ignited it. Master Respect didn't move, and he just watched Maul run towards him. The Bushido Council, in one unified motion, lifted their hands and used the Force to put Maul down. It wasn't spiteful or malignant, it was an effort to bring peace to his mind. Maul ran forward, but as he did, his legs died out from under him and he fell to the ground before the Council. His hands dropped into the sand and his lightsaber deignited. He crawled forward, using every ounce of anger to try and propel himself at the Council, but in unity they called out in one singular motion, calling for peace. A tear dropped from Maul's eye, and he let go all of his hate in an instant. They watched him slowly but peacefully die. There was no more pain for Maul, which was the intent of the Council. Anakin asked Master Respect why they hadn't done that before without killing him. Respect turned and told Anakin that Maul needed to make that choice himself. While the Collective Council was strong, they would not force their will onto another. It would take away from what it meant to be Bushido, and it would take away from what it meant to hold their 7 values so close to them. If they forced Maul to change without his own accord, then he would have been a new person, but they would not be true to their integrity, honor, loyalty, courage, honesty, compassion, or respect. While Anakin couldn't care either way if Maul lived or not, he was just curious, and Master Respect expressed that there was no reason to fret about it. They didn't hurt Maul. They gave him a moment to see what could have been before allowing him to have the peace that he had always craved. The Council collected Maul's body up and wrapped him in white robes. They lifted him up and allowed the Force to ferry him to the cosmic realm. The 3 former Jedi watched as a lifeless Maul floated down into the ocean away from the temple. Ahsoka asked how he was floating when he was no longer alive, and Respect reminded her of the great mystery of the Force. It happened with all who died at the Dojai Temple. Their remaining body would be placed in white garments and would be sent off into the waters. Their physical body was no longer a vessel, so the ocean would just take it, just like the Force would take them, to a place that they could only go alone, until they were united with others. It was interesting for the former Jedi, having not seen any death here on Lator since they first arrived. Outside of Lator, the struggling governments of the galaxy would find a middle ground. Luckily, most of the politicians were killed in the Civil War, and said war removed a lot of those corporate alliances as well. The Techno-Union, Commerce Guild, Trade Federation, even banking clans were either bankrupt or completely in shambles because of the war. This was mostly due to the Kuat drive yards, waking up and choosing violence. The Kuat drive yards, while not quite the business the others were, was sick of their shenanigans and decided to wage war on them with their largest vessel the galaxy had ever seen. The clones supporting Kuat, due to it producing most of their warships during the previous war, jumped into the Kuat alliance and ripped the corporate alliances to pieces. The irony is the Delegation of 2000 and many of the separatist governments' politicians survived. What was even more ironic is these individuals were more on the same side of each other than they were with Palpatine and his people. Being that most politicians did die or retire, the Delegation of 2000 was closer to the Delegation of 320, but they would make it work, eventually. On Lator, Ahsoka continued to watch Luke and Leia grow up. She was so excited to have completed her journey as a Seeker, but one never loses the title. She would forever be the one who united the religions of the Force, more or less the Jedi and the Bushido. Most days, Ahsoka would spend time around the temple, just as Obi-Wan and Anakin did. From time to time, she would visit the top of Mount Kedah, where Yoda and Terra Sanube lived permanently. One day, Ahsoka was meditating outside the temple on the beautiful sands. Ahsoka's eyes shut, and she was sat before the great temple. She was so confused. A little girl came up to her and called her Master Tano. She smiled and tugged at Ahsoka's hand. She asked what this was about, and the little girl tugged harder. Ahsoka looked at the grandeur of the temple. It was beautiful, and it was so snugly fit into a valley, though as she turned back to hear the sound of waves, she could see that the temple was built in the most peaceful abode in the galaxy. The water looked too perfect. She could see right through it. Her hand was pulled again and she snickered. Ahsoka walked through the gates of the temple, and the little girl said that they were waiting for her. Ahsoka turned to the little girl and asked, "Who?" She smiled with excitement and said that her students were waiting for her. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Ozzy Tano, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Johnny DeGuin, Sans the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Youngling Slayer 66, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Same 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting that channel. Smash the like button if you enjoyed this mini series. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. Updates for the Sith Clone Wars are there, along with other things like this. Anyways, let's talk about it. I really like kind of doing these videos. We did something similar to this with the Plo Koon leaving the Order with Ahsoka, but we went in a much different direction. I wanted to completely remove us from the story elsewhere. I didn't want the Sith, Jedi, the whole thing that we do every video to be kind of covered. I wanted this to be Ahsoka's journey. Now, obviously, I know Anakin leaving the Order is kind of a big deal, but this is Ahsoka and Obi-Wan's story, and more or less, it's Ahsoka's story. It's the story of why Ahsoka's leaving the Order, why Obi-Wan left the Order, and where they're going, and that's kind of like the focus of it. And I really like that all this stuff, by the way, is this not canon. It's just made up for this story in particular. So it's kind of fun bringing up long time like things for people that have been viewers of the channel for a long time. But it's also kind of cool to expand the lore on them and kind of go into different directions. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to go in a really different direction. But regardless of that, I really hope you all enjoyed this. This was fun. It wasn't action-packed, and that kind of was the point. I wasn't trying to do action-packed. I was kind of more wholesome, more interesting, I guess. Something that's like a little less surface level, a lot more deeper, intertwined. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.